This episode of How To Wrestling was requested by one of our lovely backers over at patreon.com/How To Wrestling, where, hey, if you like this podcast and you like what we do and you like it being ad-free, well, you can get a whole bunch of extra bonus content over there. Each and every month, Joe and I do at least 2 new pieces of content, including all of the WWE and AEW pay-per-views, starting all the way back in 2016. As well as that, we've got our ongoing pay-per-view classic series, where we do deep dives and full-scale reviews of some of our favorite, weirdest, oddest, and most random pay-per-views of the classic variety. The most recent, of course, being In Your House, Beware of Dog. As well as that, you've got our Totally Divas series, where we're reviewing all of Total Divas and all the drama that happened along the way, and lots of other special treats as well. Check it all out. You can become a backer for as little as $5 a month, and you get access to that immediate back catalogue and new pieces of content each and every month. There's a whole lot of great content there, and you can support this show at the same time as well. I hope you're excited for this episode. It is one that we had so much fun researching and recording, and dare I say, Joe and myself, our wrestling fandom has been changed forever as a result of it. It's a different episode. I hope you give it a listen, even if you're not that familiar with the subject matter. It's How To Tenryu. Greetings, friend, and welcome to the episode of How To Wrestling, the world's first podcast detailing how to wrestling, how to get into wrestling, how to understand wrestling, and goodness knows, maybe even how to enjoy wrestling. And today's an episode with a difference. Once again, it's me, your old pal, Captain Kevin, joined as I am always by my better half, my wife, my co-host, the other half of How To Wrestling. It's Joe Graham.
Hello.
So today's episode, a bit different, Joe. We're talking about Tenryu.
That's right, yeah.
This is not our typical wheelhouse, it's safe to say.
Not at all, yeah.
Who is Tenryu? What's this episode about? And why have we decided to focus inexplicably on this extremely elder statesman of Japanese pro wrestling?
Tenryu is a legend. And it feels inappropriate to say a legend in Japan, because he's not just a legend in Japan. He's obviously he's penetrated outwards as well, which is part of the reason why we're doing an episode on him.
Yes, there's many arguments to be made that if you removed this gentleman from the history of pro wrestling, that wrestling as you know it in the East or the West would not be the same. A link, a bridge of sorts between America and Japan and everything in between. But this is a man that we're talking about whose career, by my count, spans 5 decades.
Yeah.
So it's quite an enormous task in many senses.
Yes, and that's just including his professional wrestling career. That's not including, his sumo career.
Or his post-wrestling career, where he's still been involved in all of that as well.
Yeah.
So Tenryu is a guy who it's a name that I had heard frequently over the years.
He's one of those wrestlers, I feel, like Terry Funk or Stan Henson, where you get certain wrestling fans who are very knowledgeable, and it's quite intimidating, especially if someone like me is a new fan.
And for me as well, who, old Japan and Japanese wrestling in general, it was never something I watched regularly. If you want to know how much Japanese wrestling I've watched, it's here mostly on How To Wrestling for the most part, yeah.
But he's one of those names that gets brought up by people who are very knowledgeable about wrestling, and not just wrestling in America or wrestling even in the West. He's just he is such a huge and important name that he will always pop up in those conversations of who's the greatest wrestler of all time. And often those conversations happen on Twitter, where it's a mostly English-speaking audience. And so normally the responses are like The Undertaker or whatever. And that's fine, that's valid. But the people who really know ball, who have watched a lot more wrestling than even you, Kevin. You've watched more wrestling than anyone I've ever met. His name always is mentioned.
Yeah, this was one of these episodes where I was kind of giddy with excitement about getting stuck into it. It feels like there's a lot of the episodes that we've done in the build up to this have kind of inadvertently been setting the scene for us. We've dipped our toe into the world of Japanese wrestling on a few different occasions, notably the Manami Toyota and Alundra Blaze episodes, but also when we're looking at the likes of Terry Funk, Vader as well. And, you know, even on our pay-per-view Classique series, we have dipped into Japanese wrestling over on the Patreon page.
Yeah, we did a New Japan show, was it?
We did a New Japan show, and also we did like an AWA Super Show from back in the day where a very young Tenryu appeared as well. And it's very rare where you can have someone who has been in the ring with, you know, even if you're not a knowledgeable Japanese wrestling fan, you know the name Antonio Inoki. You've probably heard the name Okada as well. If you are interested in wrestling in general, those are names that come along. This man has been in the ring with both of those people. And it's very hard to come up with analogues in the West of someone who has operated at a high level for as long as he did. He's been a promoter, he has been a media figure, a cultural icon in Japan. And I kind of felt like as the more research we did for this episode and the more that we watched, I kind of personally got more and more passionate about I want people to know more about Tenryu. And I'm saying that I'm necessarily the best man for the job, but we've had a lot of help from all of our followers on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and on our Patreon page as well. And honestly, I'll say it as it is, the lack of accessible info out there about a lot of figures in Japan, it's not what you'd want it to be, really.
No, that's it. And it's kind of understandable, I think, that a lot of Western fans don't know much about Japanese wrestling, or even more specifically, classic Japanese wrestling, because it is actually quite inaccessible, even in the medium of professional wrestling, which, as an outsider, is hard to penetrate. But, there's so much fantastic Japanese wrestling, which if you don't speak Japanese, or you don't have friends or contacts who already kind of know about it, it's actually very hard to naturally come across.
Yeah, and I think also as well, you know, there was a huge explosion in, you know, probably from 2013 or thereabouts onwards in New Japan, and that kind of caused a lot of Western eyes to start paying attention to what was happening over in Japan in terms of modern wrestling. And as much as that has kind of definitely penetrated, you can see that in AEW, you know, the fact that names like Okada and Ishii and Naito and whatnot, they're kind of, you know, a lot more synonymous now with just general wrestling fandom than they would have been, you know, 15 years ago or whatever. But it feels like that slightly older era, even though Tenryu has bled into the more recent eras. That slightly older era, like when I was looking online, a lot of it felt like kind of expert to expert communication. People who knew loads and loads and loads about, you know, All Japan, or been watching King's Road style since, you know, the 80s or whatever, telling each other about great matches they'd seen and whatnot. Whereas the barrier to entry, if you didn't have that kind of baseline know-how or a couple of decades under your belt, it's kind of hard. So much like Tenryu is the link between the East and the West, we're hoping today to simply be a link for you, the listener, to maybe be able to pursue your own look in at this incredible man and this absolute bananas style of wrestling that he helped pioneer. Because you've got two people here, folks, who sat down going, well, we're going to learn about wrestler, and now I think we've come away with, by my count, Joe, I've got 3 new favourite wrestlers.
Yeah, at least.
And that's coming from having watched, by my count, around 100 All Japan and Tenryu matches in the last month or thereabouts. We've been eating and drinking very well in How To HQ.
Yeah, that's it. It's impressive that, and I think it says a lot about the quality of wrestling at the time and from that part of the world, that, you know, Tenryu is a legend. He is one of the best wrestlers, but even still, so many of the matches that we watched, other competitors came away looking so good, and they were so exciting.
New appreciation for people that we'd seen kind of previously, and we've seen him in a new light because of the right opponent in Tenryu.
We've come away from researching this episode wanting to do 3, at least 3 other episodes on different guys as well.
I'm looking at you, Jumbo Tsuruta, Riki Shoshu, all these Kawada, all these fucking incredible wrestlers that we've seen. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel at the point that if you're listening to this right now and you're getting all excited because we're so excited, if you want to stop listening to this and type in Tenryu, you know, All Japan or whatever is into YouTube and go watch a load of matches, we'll have considered our job done. But in the meanwhile, we're going to try our damnedest to take you through the very unique and interesting story that is probably unlike any wrestler that we've ever done here on How To Wrestling, in terms of his entryway, how he became synonymous with a certain style of wrestling, but also his position in wrestling, because I don't think there's anyone you can say has, a career exactly like this guy. His kind of outsider status, and yet at the same time being that link, that bridge between so many different companies, and also at the same time being almost like a one-man promotion, it feels like, for a lot of his career. Tenryu is not necessarily tied down to one promotion, one style, or even, one Tenryu. There's a very, very, very different images are conjured up. A lot of people listening to this think of Tenryu as a perennially owled man.
Grumpy old
a
bastard.
grumpy old bastard with a voice like gravel, and there might be some people who are only aware of him as being a much older competitor. I know there's a few people who messaged in being like, oh, that's that owl lad who was like gumming up the works in some of the, on some of the hustle shows that I watched, or a bit of Noah back in the day. And, I think it's just, Dustin Rhodes is the only one I can think of when you have a career that spans that long. The story of you even just maintaining your position in wrestling, that in itself is fucking fascinating. And I will say, we're going to talk about a lot of styles of wrestling, a lot of types of matches that hopefully, I wouldn't be hoping that many wrestlers are trying to emulate some of the things that we're going to talk about here today.
Oh, that would be scary and brave.
Very scary,
or maybe
indeed.
Stupid. I don't know.
So look, is this going to be the definitive every single classic match? Of course not.
No, but we acknowledge the fact that we are, this is a bit of a new wheelhouse for us.
Yeah, I think, what my hope with this is that you can take away from this episode an appreciation for perhaps a different type of wrestler.
Yeah.
And maybe at the same time as well, we might recommend you some fucking incredible matches to get your teeth stuck into.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that anyone listening to this has like a new name that they can, bring up in conversation of like, it's just like such a important and an integral part of wrestling. It's like not knowing who Ric Flair is. Like really, he's like as significant, if not far more so. So
yes, we're going to give you endless wrestle cred here today.
Yeah, that's
folks.
it. We're going to make you such a cooler wrestling fan for this episode.
So our story with Tenryu goes all the way back to, good lord, I think we're talking about the late 50s, early 60s, his upbringing and his background, not the typical one that we would necessarily see when we're doing an episode of How To Wrestling. His route into professional wrestling is through sumo wrestling.
Yes, which actually wasn't unheard of at the time, and actually even since. There have been quite a few wrestlers from sumo who have moved into wrestling.
Famously, Riki Dozan, who's like, the grandfather, I guess you could say, of Japanese wrestling, like one of the original native superstars who helped make it a pillar of culture in Japan. So those two things, sumo obviously extremely important and revered in tradition in Japan, as is pro wrestling, but it kind of, there was a flow from one to the other, so to speak.
A bit of a pipeline, yeah. It's just that normally, and I'm not saying this happened to everyone, but on the whole, a lot of sumo wrestlers that moved to professional wrestling, they did it after their sumo career had kind of come to a natural end. And so, as far as I had read, it was a bit of a joke among certain wrestling fans, pro wrestling fans, that, the ex-sumo guys were a bit,
I mean, look, I know you gave it 5 stars, Joe, but we can all talk now about,
Big Show.
Big Show, Akibono, there are a couple of images that might be conjured up. You might think like, Yokozuna or Rikishi or even John Tenta, the Earthquake. But, when it comes to sumo, maybe perhaps always just the image of a really big, wide, stout guy doing the sumo stance or whatever it is. It's not necessarily, like, there are ranks in sumo, there are weight classes in sumo.
Absolutely, different styles and things, different techniques.
It doesn't necessarily just mean very big man.
No, not at all. No, I mean, on the whole, obviously, compared to a normal person. But, the image of, of Yokozuna, the wrestler we know in the WWE, WWF, that is not necessarily what all sumo wrestlers look like or aspire to look like.
Most of them are Japanese.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, for one.
So Tenryu, his background was very interesting to try and research because, limited as we were in our translation options, we've had to try and kind of rely upon a variety of different sources, and we have had some help with some of our long-time listeners and friends, some of who speak Japanese. So we've been able to find out a lot about the upbringing and getting into sumo. I mean, the funny thing with sumo is I think they're doing sumo in the Royal Albert Hall this year in London.
And
I do remember Joe's dad messaged us and he was like, "You like wrestling? It's on." And when I went to Tokyo, I went to the Ryogoku Hall, just to see it. There wasn't anything on at the time, just to see it because I knew it was a kind of a legendary place. But What do you really know about the world of sumo, and what is it in terms of its position in Japan, did you know?
Before this episode, I knew a little bit about it because I actually used to do another podcast with some friends of mine called Subcultured. And on that podcast, what we would do is we would look at kind of subcultures across the world, and we would kind of do a bit of a deep dive into them with a kind of silly twist. And we did do an episode on sumo. My friend Jacob was the host, and he knows quite a lot about sumo. And so I knew a bit about that. I knew about some of the ranks. I knew about the training and the role of a young boy.
Already, you've seen the parallels, I guess.
Yeah.
To go back to our Shinsuke episode, we talked a lot about the young boy system that is kind of synonymous with becoming a wrestler in Japan. The kind of earning your stripes, starting off very basic, no flair, no fireworks or sizzle to you, having to be like the guy who carries the bags, cleans the gym, looks after the veterans and all that.
Yeah, well, so, in sumo, it's that 100-fold.
Yeah.
Because it's not just setting up the ring and training and being like a personal assistant to the more senior wrestlers. It's also a case of, of doing laundry, of cooking, cleaning, that kind of thing.
Yeah, looking after the dojo and
absolutely.
And whatnot.
Etiquette.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of etiquette and tradition that are based in sumo. And that was the thing that, for me, I've always known that sumo is a sport and regarded very seriously in Japan, but it being kind of something that's steeped in tradition and theatre as well.
And not just those two things, but also it is considered quite sacred.
Yes, well, 700 years of tradition. It goes way back.
Absolutely, and there's a reason they scatter salt in the ring to dispel evil spirits and stuff like that. Like, it isn't just, isn't just the way we see the wrestling ring in the West, where it's like, oh, you respect the ring because you wipe your feet beforehand. It's like there's a whole ritual around that ring and around how you treat it and around how the wrestlers are themselves treated.
So definitely a lot of parallels with,
A lot of parallels, but turned way up.
So getting into sumo, I was shocked to find that it's almost as simple as, if you're a big kid, basically the folks in the neighborhood will start asking the parents, a pretty big boy there. You want to send him to one of the sumo houses, or the stables, I guess, as they were known at the time. And Tenryu was, in fact, a very big boy, Joe.
Yeah, so Tenryu, he grew up on a farm. He was the eldest son of a farmer. And so, big, strong boy. Strapping young lad. But unfortunately, he was so big. He's such a stout lad. He would actually get bullied for how stout he was. And he had quite a bit of a complex, actually, around his size when he was younger, because he was so much larger than all the other kids.
And we're talking young here. We're talking,
This is you're 7, 8 years old?
Yeah.
This is very young, yeah.
He got scouted, probably when he was 12 or 13 or thereabouts, so,
Yeah, so when he was about 12 years old, 13 years old, he was with his father, who was getting his hair cut at the local barber's, and the barbershops at those times were quite social places, community spots.
Yeah.
And the barber there was doing a guy's hair. And the guy's hair he worked at a sumo stable. And he asked Tenryu's dad, hey, do you know any big boys? And Tenryu's dad went, yeah, I got a big boy. Check out this big boy here.
This one I
got the biggest boy in the village. And they loved the look of him. And they were like, that's a great big boy you got there. We'll have him. Thanks very much.
So the idea that at age 13, you are enrolled in a sumo stable, and they're not just responsible for, hey, you're going to learn how to be a sumo. You're also going to live here. You're going to train here. They're responsible for your education. They're basically your guardian at this point. And he went from living in Fukui, which is that's the type of place that's very rural. I heard it kind of compared to being rural Alabama or rural Tennessee or whatever in America. And he went to train in the stable. He had to go to Tokyo. Now, I can't imagine in the 60s in Japan what a mind-spinning experience it would be. As a man who went from living in rural County Westmeath to Dublin when he was 12 years old, and I was shook. I don't think there's a comparison, because that's a whole other world.
It's a huge culture shock, and it happens at such a formative age. And he was very well aware of how much his life would change. When he was first scouted, he got to do a bit of a trial, basically, in Tokyo. And then he was kind of allowed to go back home for a bit. And while he was back at home, he thought about it a bit, and he was like, I think I want to do baseball. Tenryu was a very athletic child.
Yeah.
Hugely athletic. He did shot put, he did baseball, all the sports he could do, he did them all. And when they came to actually finally recruit him, he hid at his friend's house so that they wouldn't be able to find him. He didn't want to go.
Because he wanted to play baseball.
He wanted to play baseball. But his dad was also a stout, stocky guy. And he also wanted to be a sumo wrestler when he was young, because he was unfortunately not allowed to because he was the only child of the farm.
Right, so if in that situation, you wouldn't have been allowed to back in those days,
No, you wouldn't have been allowed to at all because it's your responsibility to continue the family farm. So when he obviously heard that his son had this opportunity to live his dream, he was very much like, oh no, you're going to be a sumo wrestler, just like I wanted to be. So Tenryu was kind of forced into living his father's dream. And it's like, you know, when you're 12 years old, you might not even have an idea of what you actually want to do in life.
Good luck. I mean, you know, I've spoken in that sense when I was like 22. I'm like, yeah, you're only a kid, you know what you're doing.
No.
Like, I was 12 years old. Yeah, probably don't have a great idea what you want to do with your life.
So when it was time for him to finally get sent off to Tokyo, as you say, to join the stable and to train, the way they kind of pressured Tenryu into sticking with it was a local dignitary gave him around 50,000 yen as a parting gift, which is about 5 times the monthly salary in Japan at that time. It's a huge amount of money. And they also arranged for an article to be written in the local paper about him signing with this very successful stable with a long lineage and stuff like that. So the idea was they were putting all this pressure on him.
So you can't back out.
Come
like,
back,
right.
yeah.
Maximum pressure, make the diamond out of the coal.
Yeah.
So training as a sumo, particularly back in those days, I mean, we have heard some horror stories about, you know, people even training to be a wrestler in Japan. There has been kind of some scary incidents over the years with that kind of young boy system, and I know that there's a lot of changes were made in more recent years in the dojos as a result of like some kind of tragedies or instances of hazing and things like that. Now, I am going to assume, given it the time period and also it being steeped in tradition and also quite secretive, I guess, and insular, a law upon themselves, I guess, so to speak, the training in a big, intense stable with all the expectations on the world as you is probably pretty damn hardcore and pretty tough.
I mean, just the physical aspect alone, obviously very, very hard. That's kind of the side of things that we, as Westerners who don't know much, we all know that the training for sumo is very difficult.
And that they have to eat lots.
And
that was the one thing is like, oh, you got to eat lots.
You got to eat lots, but also you don't get access to the good stuff. You don't get beef. You don't get meat. You have to earn your meat as a young boy. You don't get that for like 6 years or so.
Fucking hell.
But anyway, on top of the physical training of training to become a sumo, there's so many other aspects to it as well. Like, for instance, because he was only around 14 years old at this point, there is a law in Japan that you have to remain in education until you are 15.
Right.
And so the stable, as his legal guardians, had to legally enroll him in a school.
Yeah.
However, they obviously didn't want him wasting his time with schoolwork because that's not useful for them.
That's what happened in my school as well with the boys who played rugby.
Yeah, I think that's quite common across the world, but in slightly
Take the
different
book
ways.
away, put a ball in front of them.
Yeah.
Except it probably in this case it'd be like a big bowl of food. Get training, boy.
The difference is, it wasn't like they were like, oh, well, you can slack off if you want to. It was more like, we aren't going to teach you. So he basically was told, like, just sleep in class because
Right.
we would, you know, as your teachers,
Save
we
your
would
energy.
rather you save your energy for sumo. And Tenryu was a very stubborn, well, I was going to say little boy.
No,
but
Joe,
he's a stubborn man as well.
He's a stubborn boy, stubborn teenager, stubborn young man, stubborn adult, stubborn old man, you know?
And so, despite the fact that when he was living with his parents, he actually didn't really care for academics at all. He didn't really push himself or apply himself at all. He just wanted to have fun. But when he was told in Tokyo, no, we're not going to teach you, he was like, well, fuck you then. He found it really discriminatory. So he would order course materials through the post and study then in his spare time. So not only was he training to become physically a sumo wrestler, he was having to attend school but not doing anything. He was also teaching himself in his spare time, but also, and this is the thing that I didn't know about until recently, he had to attend training school where you learn things like etiquette.
Right, yeah.
You learn, how to respect your elders. You learn about all like the traditions of sumo, but also how to be like a classy member of society, because as a sumo wrestler, you represent the stable, which means that you have to behave in a very certain way. So that's like 4 different types of schools he was going to, On top of the fact he would have had to have woken up at like 4 a.m. to cook, get all the washing done, the laundry done, clean the dojo.
I know, I mean, he also is competing at this point as well, because I had his debut here at age 14.
Yeah.
Which is, like, shocking that is the age. Like, that's not kind of, oh, the junior ranks or, like, the baby leagues. It's like, no, as a pro, you're 14 and out you pop, like, you know. There's huge degree of, like, ranking and stuff like that in sumo. And obviously not everyone reaches the top. But he was quite successful in spite of his... I don't say he had a lack of drive. He clearly was driven, but I think he was driven in kind of a contrarian sense more than anything else. And that will go on to define a lot about Tenryu, I guess, is that kind of, you know, fuck you, I'll do it my way.
Yeah, I think... So in his own words, he said that he was very naturally physically gifted, that his style wasn't very well-rounded. He was quite aggressive and opportunistic, and it worked very well. You know, as you said, he made his way up the ranks, and he was considered like a good wrestler.
Yeah, I mean, his rank was grand, like grand status.
Yeah, it's impressive.
There's only 40, that's a fixed rank, so there can only be 42 grand sumo in the entire country. So,
but also, this is a guy who... when he saw people training, he would look at them and be like, that's lame. Don't want to do that. Can't be bothered. I don't want to really try, because I think trying is really uncool. So he's making all these achievements while just kind of being naturally good at it. There's a little bit of him that reminds me of Randy Orton.
Yeah, because the way it's been described here is that he's considered in some respects to be an underachiever, but also in other respects he is doing extremely well. He feels like it comes to him quite naturally and all that. So I guess the Randy comparisons are somewhat apt there. He's 11 years as a sumo, and he does, you know, he was considered like kind of, the comparison that I saw, you know, from reading up around about it was that he would have had the same kind of celebrity status as like a really like a beloved, like say NFL player in America or something like that, or a higher end soccer player, a higher end football player in the UK or whatnot. So like sumo isn't just kind of like, you know, oh, this kind of old-timey traditional thing in the corner. It is kind of, at that point, would have been integrated into what sports fans consumed. Being a famous sumo meant that you were a superstar. And he was, you know, before anything came into wrestling, the name Tenryu was very much known and respected in those circles.
Well, that's it. It's the nation's sport, especially at this time period. And he was, you know, there was quite a big fuss about even his signing, because he's such a big boy and he's so naturally good at it and stuff. And also... he was a very handsome boy. And this is something he is so modest about. You won't find Tenryu talk about how the girls liked him. But if you find any interviews about him, oh my God. All the other sumo were like, oh yeah, the girls come to see Tenryu. Like, they fucking love him.
So, the thing that I find interesting is that he's like around like just over a decade, like 11 years or thereabouts as a sumo. But... the typical end point for the sumo's career is usually kind of in their mid to late 30s or thereabouts. So his tenure kind of ends, you know, earlier than one would expect, given how successful he was, or given, you know, his grand status and whatnot.
Well, yeah, that's it. It was always kind of, even though he himself says he didn't imply himself as much as he maybe should have done, from an outsider perspective, he was doing very well.
Yeah.
He was rising up the ranks, and it was kind of, you know, assumed that he would make it to the top. And that didn't happen.
So obviously sumo wasn't going to be the kind of the what defined his entire career. So what was it that stopped Tenryu from this, you know, this path that he was on that felt like it was very much laid out for him, and it very much felt that probably could have just spent his days being a sumo, regarded as one of the very good sumos of the day, and there you go, that's the end of your story.
So it's a few factors. His stable master, he taught him certain ethics and morals that made Tenryu into the man he is today. And those were things like always being very generous financially, giving people who work with you money, stipends, pocket money, things like that, like always paying for their meals or their travel, like going out of your way to help them. You know, if you are a senior wrestler, that is your job to help people below you. And similarly, with regards to the matches and the training and things, it was his belief that you don't shit on the juniors, because it's not right. That's not how things should be done. You should respect people. You know, you want to bring out the best in everyone, not just trample on everyone.
See, that's interesting you say that, because I'm pretty sure, isn't there like a special word specifically for hazing in sumo and wrestling?
Yes, it's called kawaigari, which is a euphemistic term for very violent hazing.
So I can only imagine there's a lot of horror stories
yeah.
from the day, and probably most of them you'll never hear about because I think it's quite secretive in some respects, you know. And look, I know there's people. Hazing happens across the world in many different things, in organized sports. It happens in organized fraternities. All sorts of things. But I think maybe the culture overall has arched away from that in the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, there were some high-profile cases where actually people died.
Yeah.
But Tenryu has spoken about one instance in particular where he forgot to bring his stable master's binoculars for a tour they were going on. And his punishment for that was to be beaten by the seniors, and that's not just with their hands, that's with weapons. That's things like bamboo swords, bamboo sticks, wooden planks. It's really, really bad. But I want to make it clear that this isn't just like an issue with his stable. This is kind of endemic to the industry. This is kind of at the time it was seen as necessary. To a point. They were justifying it themselves in their head. Even Tenryu said when he was beaten, he believed it brought him confidence, it made him a better wrestler. It was only kind of 20 years later he was like, that was actually probably not good.
It's interesting though, because that a lot of that mentality we do see in pro wrestling later on as well, which is, the stiffness, the toughness, the hard strikes, whatever it is, you're preparing that kind of next generation and they'll be better for it and so on.
What I found so freaky about him talking about it was how the seniors the next day, they kind of went up to him and were like, huh, how was that, right? Good, huh? Yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, you like that? It's just weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like, I hear that and I again think about when I was in school and there was a big sports element to it.
Yeah.
And that was a huge aspect of it as well.
And again, like going back to the Randy Orton comparisons, like again, it happens in the army. There's so many industries where hazing is just normalized.
Yeah, so is it simply a case then that, saw a lot of hazing, didn't like what was going on?
Not at all.
So he's out of here?
Not at all. No, the hazing didn't bother him, actually. As I said, he thought it was a good thing at the time. No, so what happened was his stable master died. And sumo is quite complex with regards to succession. When a stable master dies, normally he has a successor lined up, ready to take over. And that successor is the most senior sumo wrestler.
Eldest boy. I'm the eldest boy.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it's someone who has, proved their way to the top, someone who has been closely mentored by the stable master. And then on top of that, what you need is something called a kobu, which is a sumo wrestling license.
Okay.
And that's basically to show that you have permission from the JSA, the
Sports Authority.
Basically the Sports Authority, the Japanese Sumo Authority.
God, we're talking about like state athletic commissions and stuff
So
like that.
yeah.
It's so
So you need permission from the JSA, you need the kobu, the license for the stable to run it, and then you need to be named as a successor. Now, the person who was supposed to be kind of implied next in line hadn't been named by the original stable master who died. So when he died, the kobu, the license, actually went to the stable master's widow. And so it was her decision. She was the authority here to decide who would take over. And so normally what happens in even those situations is they just give it to the next in line. Everyone goes, well, he's obviously the most qualified, give it to him. But that didn't happen. Instead, it was really weird, actually, what did happen. She ended up picking this other guy in the stable who was much, much lower down, but deemed to be kind of a bit more malleable, a bit more on the straight and narrow, someone that they could kind of control.
Are you telling me this succession had some sort of a Machiavellian scheming and undercutting involved?
I don't want to say that because I'm not knowledgeable enough. And also, the information isn't really, as far as I know, it's not out there. It's something that's very private, happens behind closed doors. And, these things, they don't, just because normally it happens one way doesn't mean it has to happen that way. But what was weird was that she picked this other guy as the successor, but because in sumo there is so much about lineage and about earning your right to be a stable master, in order to kind of justify her choice, she arranged for her daughter to marry him.
This really feels like Succession now.
Oh, you haven't heard the half of it. Her daughter decided, no, I don't want to marry him, actually. Said no. So instead, the widow adopted him as her son so that she could still place him as the stable master.
Wait, so Marcia adopts Tom in this situation is what you're saying?
As her son.
Wow.
Yeah. And obviously, a lot of people were very upset by this.
Including Tenryu, I'm assuming.
Tenryu was kind of upset, but the guy who had been kind of passed over, he said, well, fair enough. I actually can get a kobu of my own. I can borrow one or I can buy one. So he went off and he started his own stable. It was brand new. And that's, again, quite unusual in sumo because normally they have quite a long lineage.
Yeah.
But he went off and he started his new stable. He and Tenryu were really close friends. Like, they were very much, he had mentored Tenryu and stuff like that. So Tenryu requested through the JSA to move stables, to move to this stable with his friend. And they said, no. They said, you have to work with this guy who's probably less senior than your friend.
He's got a new mom.
Who has very different morals and attitudes to how sumo should be done.
Yeah.
The guy who Tenryu wanted to work with, he was much more aligned with Tenryu's values.
Not just like, I'm under the jurisdiction of someone who isn't doing things my way. You also have the difficulty of right across the street there's where I want to be with the people I want to be, etc., etc.
And also, he wanted that new stable that was being formed was actually being run in a much more similar way to how Tenryu's original stable would have been run. So it kind of was more of a natural fit for him. And so when he was told, no, you can't do that, you have to stay at this original stable, Tenryu, again, was like, well, fuck you, I'll leave. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to work with this guy who doesn't agree with what I believe in.
Now, we'll probably end up saying words to that effect over and over and over and over again, because Tenryu is like very much like the third way, his, doing things, that's kind of synonymous with like both his persona in wrestling, but also I think how he kind of conducted business throughout. So at this point, we're kind of into like the mid to late 70s.
But I just want to make it clear, that was quite shocking at the time. Like, it would have been in the press, the fact that he would have left at such a point in his career when he was such an up-and-comer.
High profile,
Absolutely. I don't want to say it's a scandal, but it's certainly newsworthy.
Definitely, and that would obviously then lead you to believe that a wrestling promoter who's got his eyes and ears on what's going on in the world and what could be kind of attention grabbing would probably want to jump on something like Tenryu leaving a high profile position in sumo at the ripe age of 26, which it's funny because 26, you could probably make the case, too old for the training, 26 years old, you can't start wrestling training at that point, but it's Giant Baba, the promoter of All Japan Wrestling, who ends up approaching Tenryu.
So when Tenryu was deciding to leave sumo, he met up with a friend of his called Ryu Morioka, who was a former Tokyo Times reporter, and he had a lot of connections in the sports industries. And he knew Giant Baba. He was a friend of his. So he was the one who kind of got them both in contact with each other and kind of like, would have said to Giant Baba, hey, this up-and-coming star who's been in the newspapers everywhere, he's thinking of jumping ship. And to Tenryu, he's like, well, there's actually potentially a really good fit over here. And what was interesting is at this time, Tenryu's girlfriend actually died. He's quite a serious relationship at this time, and she unfortunately passed away. And those kind of combination of factors, his stable master dying, his friend having to move to a different stable and him not being able to follow, his girlfriend dying, his attitude completely changed. He suddenly went from not really caring about being ambitious and working hard to, oh, maybe I should actually apply myself. Maybe I should, do something with my life. And I know it's funny to say as he's already a very successful and wealthy sumo wrestler at this point, but he actually originally did want to continue in sumo. He really wanted to stay with the original stable if they would have him. But unfortunately, because he tried to change stable masters...
Yeah, he's kind of blacklisted in that sense.
Everyone refused to work with him. So he ended up leaving, again, partly because he just wanted to make the stable healthy again.
So Giant Baba is a very, very interesting fellow, a name you've probably, heard here and there if you've ever dipped your toes into anything about Japanese wrestling. Someone who is extremely revered in not just Japanese wrestling, but in Japanese culture. He's probably one of the top kind of 2 or 3 names in the history of wrestling in Japan. Now, Giant Baba had the dubious distinction of being referred to by Joe as being like one of the titans from Attack on Titan, because he is quite a physical specimen, let's just say.
Yeah.
But as feared as he was in the ring in his heyday in the 60s and 70s, he's more really known among circles for being a promoter. There were 2 main promoters in Japan around this time. You had Giant Baba, who was promoting for All Japan Pro Wrestling, and you had Antonio Inoki, who was promoting what would then go on to be known as New Japan Pro Wrestling. The best way you could describe Antonio Inoki is like if you combined Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan and made them one person. And that, for all the good and bad that entails, both the stardom as a cultural figure, that is just kind of, you can't remove him from the culture. He is that important. He is like everyone's childhood hero and childhood fave. He has maintained that position, but also he was the power broker, both as a star and as a promoter, a kingmaker and a king all at once. Whereas Giant Baba had a different approach. Giant Baba was, in many respects about growing up a crop of talent, developing talent, trying to develop a style of wrestling and to develop a promotion off the basis of these people that he would find. And all that stuff that we talked about in the Shinsuke episode many, many moons ago about the young boy system being brought in and, having to start at the bottom and work your way up and all that. That was very much like a New Japan kind of approach in many respects, and Inoki was very much a proponent of that. Whereas Giant Baba felt that if the right situation presented itself with the right star, we could do things a little bit more. I mean, what people might compare it to how Vince McMahon might have promoted someone. Case in point, Tenryu is kind of picked for greatness from the lineup of, people who've left sumo, and it's like, come into wrestling, we're going to strap a rocket to you, you're going to go straight to the top. None of this kind of open match bullshit. You're going to go, like, literally tagging with me, Giant Baba, the legend, and like winning, that is unheard of. I think in the Shinsuke episode we talked that you probably wouldn't pick up a win for your first couple of years as a young boy.
It'd be unusual to get a match with Giant Baba, much less win against
him.
Yeah,
exactly. And, this is at the same time that another legend of Japanese wrestling, and yes, Kevin's new favourite wrestler, and Joe's also new favourite wrestler, Jumbo Tsuruta, he was a Olympian. He did amateur wrestling in the Olympics for Japan. Huge name in the media. What's he going to do next? These two studs are signed at the same time. Rockets strapped to both of them. And I think that in many respects, that you might hear and go, that's not how you're going to start off a long and lengthy career, like starting on top in the main event with the top guy. That's a recipe for disaster when you hear that as a Westerner.
I think it only worked because of Tenryu's changing attitude at this time.
Yeah.
Because he had literally decided in his head, I need to prove myself. I need to find somewhere where I can apply myself. Like in sumo, everyone was like, oh, you're the second coming of Taiho. You're going to be the next great thing.
Yeah,
and that just made him lazier. Whereas in wrestling, moving from sumo, there was this kind of preconception about sumo wrestlers doing it because that's all they could do. And that, they were often maybe a bit lazy with their matches. And he kind of liked that idea that everyone would be kind of assuming certain things about him when he was in this mindset of like, I'm going to turn everything around. I'm going to try really hard. I want something that I have to try and train and really just completely work on my motivation. So I think those two things, I think if he'd still had that attitude from sumo, it would have completely not worked.
It's very interesting as well that, with the two different approaches of Inoki and Baba, Inoki's group was very much about, Japanese stars, Japanese talent, etc. Whereas All Japan with Baba, the big theme of that was always the big Western villains coming in for the Japanese stars to face. So, it would be the likes of Stan Henson, Bruiser Brody, the Funks, etc. And that's where Tenryu was sent for his training. Before he even laced up a pair of boots in Japan or even had any training in Japan, he was put on a plane by Giant Baba to go to Amarillo, Texas.
Amazing.
To be trained by Dory Funk Jr. and Terry Funk. And yes, you're probably wondering, why did they go from Lita to Tenryu? Because both were trained by Dory Funk Jr.
That mental? I love that so much. Dory Funk in my mind is this wizard who never ages or dies.
Well, we had this nice boy coming in. His name was Genshiro Tenryu, and coming into the business, it's not sumo Tenryu, but this is the business. It's a good business, and guess who he's training with? He's training with Ted DiBiase Jr. He's training with Tully Blanchard.
Yeah,
and also he's went. Talk about the culture shock of going from Fukui to Tokyo as a youngster. He's in his mid-20s now, and he's going to Texas.
Yeah.
Not a word of English on him.
No.
And this is the thing, he didn't have, he had the funks to help him and all that, but, this was apparently a very, very much a difficult time for him early doors because he was making the towns himself, he was traveling around, being a Japanese guy without any English to you, traveling around Texas, trying to rent a car, trying to find accommodation, stuff like that. He found it really difficult. And I think that's another point, like you were saying, he had a lot of empathy for the youngsters in the sumo ranks. I think that helped him develop a lot of empathy
for foreigners,
and whatnot.
Absolutely, and it's definitely something you see later on with his own promotions and his
Yes.
attitude towards booking. He's, according to many American and Canadian wrestlers, like Lance Storm, for instance, says that Tenryu, when he worked with him, was the best boss he ever had.
Ever. No,
Just-
by no comparison to anyone else, he said,
just
yeah.
because he was so empathetic to what it was like to have that culture shock and be in a completely foreign country where you know no one, you don't know the language, you don't know really even the culture. Yeah, I think it was an important part of his life going to Amarillo.
Also, difficulty apparently for a lot of sumo when they're trying to get into, you know, pro wrestling is that everything in sumo is avoiding landing on your back. You get this like muscle memory, these instincts to stop yourself landing on your back. And of course, like the basis of most pro wrestling is flat back bumps. You got to land on your back. So the training wasn't like, you know, oh, kid's a natural straight away. It was a fairly like long road to greatness for him in some respects. You know, in his debut, he was tagging with Giant Baba. He was, you know, put over very, very strong. They gave, you know, a lot of ceremony and pomp and circumstance. They did a whole thing where, you know, cutting the knot, the ponytail that signified that he was a sumo wrestler, cutting that like at a big press conference for all the media to see. So, you know, you talk about your Roman Reignses and your John Cena's being put on a pedestal. Tenryu was put on the biggest pedestal possible, and at the same time there's another guy in Jumbo who's put on this massive pedestal as well, and he's actually more of a natural at it. And the early years of Tenryu, those late 70s years, are kind of marked by slight underachieving in many people's eyes, where he's like pegged for greatness and he's getting all these opportunities, but it's with the comparison of Jumbo Tsuruta beside him, who's so much more apt and natural at it. Tenryu's gifts, or what we've been known to be great at in wrestling, didn't come to him straight away, you know. And it's crazy to think that you have that much faith in a guy when he maybe doesn't hit the ground running immediately, you know. Because I think of say Gable Stevenson, who was a guy who was pegged for greatness, brought in from Olympic wrestling into WWE, and they tried and he didn't get it, and probably, you know, was given less time than Tenryu was, and, you know, he was kicked out the door essentially. So I think it was about Baba seeing something in Tenryu long term that maybe fans couldn't necessarily see straight away. He wasn't embraced straight away, I guess is what I wanted to say. So to
Which
speak.
I really think actually helped his mindset even more.
Yeah.
He's so stubborn about this stuff, and I think the idea of people not believing in him just made him all the more confident that he could do this.
I think we ourselves as fans do this all the time, and the fans back then did it as well, which is you see someone getting this preferential treatment and giving, like, you know, it kind of handed to them on a silver platter. That is that's a huge thing. It's a burden to overcome with the fans' minds, particularly in Japan, where they obviously still do, but then they obviously took it incredibly seriously.
Oh, yeah,
you know?
much more so, because, yes, we have the idea of paying your dues here in the West, but it's not, you know, in Japan, paying your dues is, as you say, it's being a young boy, it's setting up the ring and doing cooking and cleaning and stuff, and he would have bypassed all of that in the professional wrestling industry because he'd already done it in sumo.
So yeah, he has kind of earned his stripes, but maybe not in the exact...
to the opinion of wrestling fans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you need to clean that dojo instead.
Yeah.
But a lot of those early years were going back and forth quite a lot. He was working a lot in, like, the likes of, you know, the AWA. He did a lot of stuff with Jumbo Tsuruta, and Jumbo had a big run in the AWA actually in the late 70s and early 80s. But he was mostly splitting those early years between the two countries, which was, for someone starting off, quite a unique position to find himself in. But there was a situation, I believe, very late 70s, early 80s, where he was called in on kind of a last-second replacement for someone. He wasn't meant to be in this kind of big match that was going on. There was a guy called Dick Slater, who we've mentioned maybe once or twice before. He was meant to be in a match tagging against Baba, and they called in Tenryu, and the fans kind of started to warm to him the fact that he was able to kind of rise to the occasion and be in this kind of high-profile match with short notice. But that started a kind of a teaming of him and Jumbo together, and them as a tag team, folks, is a beautiful thing indeed.
I mean, there's a reason why, if you look up Tenryu online, most of the things that come up are related to his feud and tag team with Jumbo Tsuruta.
Yeah, and the idea, like, of Jumbo was like kind of the top guy, but Tenryu was kind of like in his shadow, so to speak, you know?
And also, just physically, when you look at them, Jumbo Tsuruta is huge. He's absolutely fucking massive, and he's got an incredible body on him. He's got this cool mullet. Like, he looks much more like a star than Tenryu did at that time. Like, and also Tenryu is a lot more subtle, I think.
That's it.
With his style and his personality, his character.
Yeah, the demeanor on his face, and you can kind of look at him and kind of go, that lad's like not giving me any facial expressions.
He's giving me nothing.
Yeah, right. He's subtle and he's understated. And like, you want to talk about understated, I think you might now kind of go, oh, Jumbo Tsuruta and Tenryu, these guys sound really cool the way Kefin and Jo are going. You probably Google a picture and go, there they are with their plain black tights and the plain black boots, but Tenryu's got yellow trim, and then that's kind of as it goes for flair and pizzazz.
Yeah.
As much as you get, and that didn't change for the man's entire career.
Yeah.
But what makes them charismatic, what makes them exciting, what makes them endearing, it's not about just how they're dressed, how they look, the immediate thing. It's about the story of the matches, and that was a huge shift in All Japan, where what it was about was what happens in the match and how the match is built up.
I know for me, as a Western new fan, that's been the hardest part about wrapping my head around Japanese, especially classic Japanese wrestling, I should say, rather than modern. It is so understated. There isn't this flash. You know, you think of 80s wrestling in America and you think of like Ric Flair or even Macho Man. Yeah, all of these huge personalities with characters where you can just see a photo of them and you know how they'll wrestle, but that's not the case in Japanese wrestling. So for me, it was kind of a slight uphill battle to understand that totally different mindset. But once you get into it, I fucking love it now. I love it so much because there is so much more of an emphasis on the in-ring story.
Yes.
And the styles and how the styles contribute to the character's own story.
Jumbo and Tenryu had this kind of vibe about them that they were the two lads who were tough enough to keep the foreigners who were coming in at bay. And boy, whether it was the Road Warriors, we see the Road Warriors coming in facing them, like this is like one of their first tours of Japan, these guys are nothing but muscle, like fucking baddies from Fist of the North Star, or Terry Gordy, Bruiser Brody, Stan Henson, these big fucking bastards. And that's something that's quite striking about Tenryu, is that size-wise, he's bigger than like a lot of the modern Japanese wrestlers. Like if you looked at like a Naito or a Tanahashi or whatnot, a lot of the guys you might be more familiar with from more recent times, like breadth, depth, not necessarily height, big meaty men. And if you like big meaty men slapping meat, type in AGPW and either of these men's name and the word versus, and you're in for a good time.
Yeah.
And that takes us to our first match. Now obviously picking just a few matches was very difficult given the caliber of the matches and how many matches that we watched. We might probably end up making reference to random matches we watched here and there, but don't forget, as always, you can check out recommended bonus viewing, of which there will be a lot, I'm sure, over on howtowrestling.com, your home for all the extra info mentioned in these here episodes. But yes, our first match is Jumbo Tsuruta and Tenryu taking on the formidable team of Riki Shoshu and Yoshiaki Yatsu. This comes to us from 1986. And what I will say, with regards to All Japan Pro Wrestling and the absolutely revered era of the late 80s into the early 90s, what would go on to be known as the King's Road style, of which this match is considered to be kind of a very much like a spark that helped light that fire.
What is King's Road? I don't know anything about Japanese wrestling. I know a little bit about, like, 'cause we did the Shinsuke episode. Yeah. We talked about strong style.
I think you probably know more about Japanese wrestling for women because of the Manami and the Alundra Blaze episodes.
But what is King's Road?
So King's Road is different from strong style. I hear that people kind of conflate the two all the time, but I have it on very good authority that they are separate entities. Strong style perhaps be more related to New Japan and Antonio Inoki's idea of incorporating MMA, actual combat sports, a realism, strong strikes, submissions, etc. Whereas King's Road style, and folks, this is why I love King's Road style, is more about the idea of matches that are battles that as the longer they go, the more physically intense they become. And one of the founding philosophies of King's Road style wrestling is that the older you get, the more powerful you become.
Oh, okay. That's a nice idea in theory, but
the idea,
I don't know how that works in practice.
Well, it's why you end up with these big, strong, fucking battle-hardened veterans. Obviously, Tenryu would become one. Jumbo Tsuruta would become one of them. Riki Shoshu himself would as well, but also names like Misawa, names like Kenta Kobashi, etc. The idea being as well in King's Road that it's not just about trading loads of finishers. You usually build up to one finisher
is that not just like the same as what we have in like WWE at the moment? Like,
no, because we do like 10 finishers and everyone kicks out of everyone's finisher.
Right, but
then you do the top rope finisher. Cody Rhodes his finisher is when he does 3 finishers now.
But my point is more to do with the older wrestlers being more powerful. For instance, with the Undertaker's later matches, he would have probably only done like 1 or 2 tombstone pile drivers. No,
sorry, that's just me banishing away the people with pitchforks and torches who've come to our house because you compared modern WWE to King's Road style wrestling. So, get away! She's only doing it for 10 years. Get away!
But like seriously though,
the idea of when you become the older legend, that's definitely
like the Undertaker's not going to lose very often in a match.
No, but to the point of how the matches are built. In those situations, be it a Triple H or an Undertaker or a Batista or whoever the elder lad is, the reliance on signature and finishing spots to be the thing that gets people in. And the idea of kind of, the finishers being used frequently to build up the guts of a match. If you look at, say, Undertaker versus Roman Reigns and had that match, the last half of that is just them finishers non-stop. Or like, Brock Lesnar and Goldberg, when they had their series of matches, they were almost finisher exclusive.
Okay.
So King's Road is different in the sense that it is about like the guys who've got a couple of tools, maybe a more limited moveset in the sense. They have kind of their go-to thing, be it the step-up enziguri for Tenryu, or like guys would rock the lariat, kind of like Kenny Omega has got his V-trigger or whatnot. But the finisher would usually be more of kind of, that's it, that's the end. That's not to say that there wouldn't be a kick out here and there. But this match that we're talking about here, Jumbo and Tenryu versus Riki Shoshu and Yatsu, the idea of that is like, that style hadn't yet been kind of synonymous with All Japan Pro Wrestling.
So what was the kind of predominant style at this point, do you know?
The predominant style was kind of like, relying on the likes of, Baba and whatnot, kind of some of the older names. And, using them and using the fans' love of them to kind of develop sympathy, using the threat of the foreigners and whatnot. And that was kind of, it had gotten at this point a bit old hat, so to speak. And one of the main reasons why King's Road style developed was that so many people had left All Japan, or people wouldn't stay where, they wouldn't stay in the company for long enough. Those that were left got that kind of legendary status. They were older, but we use that as a positive because, well, they're older because no one can beat them, or because they're so badass and they've been here for so long, And look, I know we talked about Tenryu and Jumbo being the guys who kind of scare off the foreigners or the big tough guys who could take them on, and obviously they're taking on 2 fellow countrymen here in Riki and Yatsu. But Riki Shoshu, his whole story was that he was meant to be one of the kind of the heirs apparent in New Japan Pro Wrestling, but he, in real life, had become extremely frustrated with the fact that Antonio Inoki and a lot of the guys on top weren't, given a bit space for the guys to kind of rise up the ranks. So he broke away from that. There was a lot of controversy in New Japan because Inoki was funneling profits from that company into, his own weird endeavors. More on that in the Vader episode.
Yes.
Joe, tell the people one of Antonio Inoki's weird endeavors.
Well, at one point, Antonio Inoki decided to... I swear
this is serious.
I swear this is true.
This is
sounds
serious.
so made up, but it is completely true.
I'm sorry, Riki Shoshu, we can't give you the money and spot that you need because Antonio Inoki needs to...
find the missing link. The
Obviously.
Sasquatch. He's going to Brazil to find the Bigfoot, which turned out to be Vader.
So Ricky's group is called Ishin Gundan. It's kind of like a revolutionary group or kind of, bucking against the trend. And something that was really interesting to find out from this episode is like our ideas of heels and faces in the West quite different from what constitute heels and faces.
I guess that makes sense
in Japan, particularly back in those days.
Because even the idea of like what makes a top star in Japan is so different from what makes a top star in the West.
I mean, like a lot of these All Japan matches that we watch, and like we've watched a couple of dozen of these alone. It's not as if one group comes out and they get big cheers, and the other group comes out and they get big boos. So the idea of like a lot of the heel work in this era of All Japan Pro Wrestling is going against tradition. That's kind of in its sense is you're a heel because you're doing that. And like what is going against tradition? It's like, well, I formed my own group. I don't believe in the philosophy of Giant Baba or Antonio Inoki, so I've got my group now, and my group goes by my terms. And it's not as if your terms are like, I'm going to low blow everyone and spit in the face, I'm going to start kicking babies, I'm going to be kissing no babies no more. It's not like that, it's just literally like, this is my group, I'm doing things my way. And like the idea of just being an individual and striking out against the years and years of tradition, that makes you kind of a villain in that sense.
I'm already seeing so many parallels between this and his sumo career.
Oh yeah, exactly, right? You know, and it's funny because Tenryu spends a lot of his career being the guy being like, hey, no, we're going to stand up for what All Japan is all about. We're going to stand up for what Giant Baba is all about. And like, Tenryu goes on to form a group that's literally called Revolution. And the very like notion of Tenryu is a guy who does things his own way, doesn't fit into any particular category. I think you were quite shocked to find out that he wasn't just, oh, he's a legend in Japan, ergo he has to have a long tenured career as a New Japan Pro Wrestling wrestler. That was never the case. He kind of went in and out a lot, you know, mostly as an outsider. But there's one thing we found out very early doors when we were looking at All Japan Pro Wrestling in the 80s. We got a bit of this in the Vader episode. Good lord, the music.
Oh my god. I think, like, just all of the entrance music at this time is so good.
Yeah,
you
it's
have
god tier.
You have like actual icons making music here. Like, just for instance, Riki Shoshu, his entrance music was done by a musician who I fucking adore called Susumu Harasawa, and he did the music for Paprika, the movie, if you've seen it, and he also did the music for the Berserk anime, the 90s one. It's fantastic. It's iconic. He is also one of those...
Stop listening, go listen to that for just a little bit.
Watch him on YouTube, because he plays like an electric saw, like an instrument. But anyway, that's besides the point. This is a Tenryu episode. And Tenryu's music was done by, perhaps for the greatest musician of all time, Masayoshi Takanaka, who is someone me and Kevin have been into now for a good couple of years.
During the pandemic, I think we've mentioned this on Cinema Swirl, but like during the pandemic, randomly one day, Joe and I got recommended on YouTube some city pop.
Apparently that's like the funnel for like Westerners to get into Japanese, like 80s Japanese pop especially.
And boy, oh boy, did that send us off rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And yeah, he's definitely one of our favorite artists.
He's so cool. Look up a picture of him right now. Masayoshi Takanaka. He plays a surfboard guitar. One of his guitars has a functioning miniature railway system on it. There's a little train that goes around into little tunnels and stuff. He's the coolest guy that has ever lived.
He did a full samba version of the Star Wars theme song.
It's so good.
And I want it to be played when I go to heaven.
And he also released the greatest album, in my opinion, of all time, called The Rainbow Goblins. And it's basically, if you listen to it, it sounds like kind of a 80s synth prog album. Kind of, it feels like it's inspired by Lord of the Rings a little bit.
Yeah, it's very Tolkien-esque,
It's so Tolkien-esque, and that's also kind of reinforced in my head because it has a narrator who sounds exactly like Elijah Wood. And Tenryu's music, his entrance music, is Thunderstorm from this album about these rainbow goblins. So his version is the instrumental one, but the actual version, the original version, does have a narration over the top. And let me just quickly read the lyrics from it. It's only short. The goblins were awakened when it began to thunder in the distance. Great, a wild storm, they said. Knowing that the most wonderful rainbows spring from the biggest thunderstorms, they began to dance. The whole album is like that. Go and listen to it. Because, yeah, not only is this episode going to introduce you to some of the coolest names in wrestling, but I guarantee you it's going to introduce you to some of the coolest names in music.
When we started watching these matches, Joe looked at me, I think with maybe 5% suspicion that I'd somehow orchestrated it, that the guy we were doing an episode on was coming out to not just one of our favourite musicians, but also the most Joe the Goblin song, that one.
I have for a couple of years now, when friends come round, I will pop on this album and just wait for them to kind of realise what they're listening to, and they'll be like, what the fuck is this like goblin music? It's so cool.
And it's so Tenryu, baby. But at this point in time, Tenryu he's still very much in the shadow of Jumbo Tsuruta, and you can see that in the dynamic they have in the match, because Ricky is definitely the main antagonist. He's the guy who's the threat to the nature of All Japan Pro Wrestling, and Jumbo's kind of taken upon himself, I'm going to handle the business here. And there's so many things you see in this match, and you have to remind yourself constantly that it's happening in the mid-80s that are so modern. The striking battles, the idea of like someone giving you a big fucking open hand chop and the person no-sells it, and it's not like, oh, he's not it's like the no-selling of something that is so obviously sore. As opposed to the Warrior, where I've given you my safe wrestling move and you make me look like an arsehole because you get up and start dancing afterwards. It's like showing the fighting spirit. Not because I'm doing a promo saying, I've got fighting spirit, let me tell you about that, brother. It's because you're seeing it in the match. It's a style of wrestling that rewards you for watching the wrestling that's actually happening in the ring. And these are all my type of wrestlers, Joe. Big, thick fuckers who are unfazed by most things that would render us all quivering messes.
My favourite thing about this match is, and actually not just this match, but I think this style of wrestling is just how logical it all is.
Yeah.
I find classic wrestling in general, even in America, is a lot more logical than it is now. I think we've become kind of more cartoony and filmographic. I don't know what the term would be, but kind of more inspired by stunts and movie work than by real fights. And when you look back and you watch classic wrestling, it's something that people will either complain about or they'll love. It's so realistic.
I like both, by the way.
Yeah, I think both are very valid and great in their own right.
I like to watch a Kenny Omega match and go, that lad's played a lot of Street Fighter.
Yeah.
I like to watch a match with Riki Choshu and Tenryu chopping the shit out of each other's going, these lads have been in a lot of actual street fights.
And I haven't been in a fight ever, but I have played a wrestling video game. And I just there were so many moments in this match where I was like, that is exactly what I would do. Like, literally, that is what I do when I play against Kevin in the 2K games. Like, there's a moment where Tenryu gets tagged in, and instead of going for his opponent, he just punches the guy waiting to be tagged, like, immediately, like, so he can't come in to stop the pin or anything like that. Like, it's just so logical. And, like, that's the only way I can relate is through video games, but I'm sure that makes sense in a real fight as well.
It challenged a lot about kind of things that I think a lot of fans hold dear as the mark of a good or a bad wrestler. Like, you know, we mentioned in the Kevin Nash episode, and it's one of my favorite, like, shoot interview moments ever, and it's really fucking funny. But Jim Cornette being like, Kevin Nash, 5 fucking moves, including the hair flip. You got the big boot, the sidewalk slam, the gimmick in the corner with the elbows, and then the shitty jackknife power bomb. You know, like, aha, you're a bad wrestler. You only have these number of moves. Now, Tenryu, I probably have, like, power bomb, kicks on the floor, back elbow, the enzigiri, and he'll probably do a lariat here. Like, genuinely, it's a struggle to get up to 5, maybe more.
But he does randomly bring out these other moves when it suits him. Like, he will do, like, a random submission move or something like that, and they'll be impressive in their own right. It's just it's not part of his repertoire.
The repertoire, everything about it, like, when it's being used, it's always in the context of a struggle.
Yes.
He's not going to do the power bomb because it's time to do the power bomb and we all want to go home and finish, because at this moment in time in this fight and this struggle has led them to this move is going to happen.
That's it. I think the powerbomb is a perfect example of this, because for me as a new fan, when I watched, it's something I had to really get a bit of dissonance with, because when you see in Western and modern wrestling people do a powerbomb, it comes out of nowhere and it kind of doesn't make sense because the opponent is waiting for it to happen.
That's most finishers in wrestling, you know.
But in this context here, they never just do it randomly. It's always a case of like it's followed a bunch of chops or punches or kicks. Like the opponent has been worn down, they are dazed, they are ready to receive. Like they can't do a move, so do a powerbomb. Because that makes sense. The opponent can't do anything. You can't really do anything with them because they're just limp. A powerbomb is a perfect move in that instance. And I'd never even thought about that before.
I really appreciate it, because I think there's a lot of people who think that it can only be one or the other. And I think both styles are very valid. They're both very entertaining. But like in the same way that, boy, you know, Speedball Mike Bailey's a guy I've been watching a lot recently with you in AEW, and he blows me away. And some of the moves that he does make me go, oh my God, like just make me jump out of my seat. And I've been watching wrestling for fucking 30 years, and this man's making me jump out of my seat because of a move he's done. And Tenryu was making me jump out of my seat on a Monday morning because he kicked a guy or he stomped on a guy. And look, every move has got weight. Every move, there's a struggle behind it.
I mean, perfect example again of that is the elbow drops,
man.
which are, I think so. And I love a good elbow drop. Like Macho Man's elbow drop is fantastic, but we get some really fast, heavy, sickening elbow drops in this match.
There's a couple of moments in the match where you kind of go, like, the cooperation is either extremely well hidden or these guys are literally, like, making themselves, like, I'm going to make myself nice and heavy now.
Yeah.
So when you have to lift me, you've got to really go in. Like, the amount of times where I would look like Tenryu is about to lift a guy up over his shoulders, but instead of the usual thing where you put their hands on their legs and you flip them over and they put their hands on your shoulders and it's like, oh, we're doing a flip together.
Yeah.
Instead, he goes, hands on his own knees.
Yeah.
Grit his teeth.
It's so sumo as well.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you're at the expense of your own bodies, and this is an unforgiving style. They are trying to really use the medium to tell a story with their bodies. And the story isn't just, and then this move, and then this move, and this move. And like, there's more than one way to pop an audience. And this audience are on tender hooks this entire match. And they managed to then tell like beautiful little stories. Like Tenryu and Tsuruta are meant to be defending all Japan from these interlopers, these guys who are like don't want to follow tradition and all that. And yet, like towards the end of the match, out of frustration, Tenryu's grabbing a chair outside. He's swinging for the fences. They're ripping off Jumbo Tsuruta's bandage. And all of a sudden, this villainous interloper is actually quite a sympathetic figure. And the guys who are meant to be the stalwarts of tradition are engaging in the type of violence that they're meant to be protecting the company from. It's beautiful. And look, there's layers to it and all that. But if you want to watch it and watch big, thick men dropping each other on their heads, there's that too.
And another thing I love about this match in particular is all of the wrestlers in this contribute something unique to the match. Like, each one of them has their own style, their own thing that they're really good at. Like, obviously, Tenryu, he's like the master of strikes. You've got Jumbo Tsuruta, who is just so powerful. Riki Shoshu is so fast. He moves like a Bron Breakker or something like that.
He is one of the most phenomenal wrestlers I've ever seen. Like, I was in love with Tenryu. We were researching this episode, and there was a point where I was like, can we just do the Riki Shoshu?
Yeah.
I love Bret Hart and I love the Stinger. I'll always be a Stinger.
Yeah.
But good Lord, this man's Scorpion Deathlock eats everyone else's sharpshooter up for lunch. He flips him around.
He's the originator, isn't he, of this move?
He is, yeah. And boy, no one did it quite like him. It's you have to see it, the way he twists them, the way he pulls them. It looks devastating.
And I'd be remiss not to mention Yoshiaki as well, who is fantastic.
He probably didn't get the legendary status as the other compatriots, but he's incredible in this.
He's so good. There are so many spots from him in this match, which, he's in here with three guys who would become, who they'd meet legendary status, within their lifetimes. But he completely he keeps up pace with them. He does a wonderful hard way to Jumbo, I think, at one point.
This was great, ladies and gentlemen. My wife,
I've gone from knowing nothing,
who was mystified by the concept of bloodletting in wrestling, and then became a sick freak who loved it. And she was literally like, hard way happening right there. And I was like, what? I look up. There is beautiful, over the corner of the eye, Jumbo Tsuruta busted open by Yoshiaki. And man, let me tell you folks, pride doesn't begin to describe. And you know what? Hard way is like homemade. It's best, isn't it? It's the best.
Homemade jam. But also, he managed to do a move which I thought it was objectively shit. Like, there's certain moves in wrestling, I've talked about it before, which I just think are shit. Like, for instance, the Tree of Woe, right? Another one of those moves I think is objectively shit is the double axe handle. Like, it's a joke amongst us and our friends.
Yeah, if you ever meet Adam Biblow, you want to make him laugh, talk about a double axe handle smash.
Yeah, like, they just always look shit. But fuck me, Yoshiaki's double axe handle is spectacular. He makes that thing look disgusting.
Beautiful things happening in this match. Like, Riki Shoshu on the outside, his bandage has been ripped off, and all the young boys come over and start reapplying the bandage.
Yeah,
I know
love
at this
that.
point.
They don't do that.
I know, right?
Like, I know they glue you up if you bleed, but they don't reapply a bandage, and I love that.
It's funny because I can think of so many matches in WWE that were like ruined in my mind as a fan at the time because the action is stopped because someone has to have a bandage put on or toweled up the blood or glued up. And then this here, I was like, oh my God, look what's happening. And I know at this point we were like nearly like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through. There hadn't been a single pin attempt.
No.
And more to the point, you're asking me what the difference between WWE style and this King's Road style that I'm gushing about is that constant like, oh, for the win, 1, 2, no, he did not. That's not part of it. We go for the pin when logically we think we might win a match. We don't go for the pin because we need to have these beats and this is how a story is meant to be told. It's because, that's not how it will be as a fight. Yoshiaki did a sling blade, which is one of the moves that Finn Balor does frequently. And this is 40 years ago, so yeah, my man was very much ahead of his time. Tenryu is trying to save Jumbo at this point. He's locked in a hold, and he runs the ropes twice. He hits Yoshiaki so hard, he himself tumbles out of the ring. It was absolutely incredible.
Quite Shawn Michaels, actually.
Yeah, except I think Shawn Michaels would have, like, and I'm not saying this to knock Tenryu, but there's an uncoordination with it, like,
makes it feel real.
When someone is swinging so hard, they lose their center of gravity.
That's it. With Shawn, he's so
in control.
He's so perfect. Yeah. It feels more like a dance. Whereas Tenryu, it feels like he's an opportunist.
Yes, and Tenryu starts throwing these extremely I love his insecurities. It's kind of like
I do too.
It's
even
a
when
gag
they're
online,
shit.
apparently.
Yeah.
People think
Yeah.
his
They
insecurities
hate
are
it.
crap.
I love it.
There's non-stop action in this, and the crowd are unglued for the entirety of it. You've got Jumbo and Ricky brawling like crazy on the outside, but in the ring, out of nowhere, Tenryu manages to slap on that big dirty power bomb, and Jumbo and Tenryu pick up the win. The team is known as Kakuryu, which is a combination of the kanji of both Saruta and Tenryu, and I will apologize for definitely mispronouncing that and probably a million other Japanese things throughout this episode. I'm very sorry, but I love this match, Joe. They get big ass trophies at the end. I wanted to reach into the television like Last Action Hero and give them another big ass trophy. This got 5 stars from Dave Meltzer back in the day, and I was like, my mouth was agape. And it's funny because we watched this match I think over a week ago, but even just talking about it now, I'm like, I'm all fucking excited and wow.
It's so good.
Great, you have got to see this match. You simply have to see this match. I loved it. What's your rating, Joe? Now, obviously, the shadow of Big Dave hanging over this, you know? So, don't want to be competing with those ratings, man,
Yeah, it's funny because I think me and Dave don't have much in common when it comes to wrestling taste. Like, I think we agree on who's great, but not necessarily on the greatest matches. I loved this match a lot. I really cannot emphasize just how logical it all felt to me. Like, it just felt very realistic in a very pro wrestling way. Like, even to the finish, right? So when you have the final pin, you had Ricky Choshu running in to stop the pin, and meanwhile you have Jumbo as well running in to stop Ricky stopping the pin. Again, it's just like
pure action,
yeah. But also, like, for me, that's again, it's like what I would do in the video game, or what I would do if I was if I was in a fight. Like, it just, they're thinking ahead because that's logically what you do. You're not planning for a finish because in kayfabe they don't know this is the finish. They're trying to stop the finish, right?
It's funny because we were watching Money in the Bank 2025. A friend of ours joined. He hadn't watched like modern WWE in like, I'd say 3 or 4 years, and he was so shook by how a lot of the presentation changes have turned so much to be like to make it a television product and not for the people in the arena, or for it to be like even remotely presented like something resembling a fight or a sport. And like very often, if it's a tag match, you will get now and then someone running in right at the end, but generally speaking, the person is late, there's a spot to lay someone out on the outside. So then we have either the double team or the focus on the guys in the ring, and that's how the match ends, because you want the focus on the finisher and the finish of the match.
And it means more often than not, you could, and I think this is intentional, you could be on your phone and watch a WB match, and you'll know, even without watching, you'll know when the finish is coming. You can kind of hear it, you can feel it.
It's like Netflix.
It's like everyone waiting for it to happen. So you just know, you can predict, the finish is coming now. Whereas this, you wouldn't, other than the fact that there's a finisher, none of the wrestlers are acting as though they know the match is about to end.
Yeah, I know, because it demands your attention, it commands your attention,
and it also it just doesn't assume that the audience is stupid. And so I love that so much. I think my only criticism with this match, I guess it's less of a criticism, more personal taste, I felt it was a bit long.
Yeah.
So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 rather than the 5 out of 5 like Dave Meltzer. But oh my God, this is a fantastic match. And I would recommend it to everyone listening.
And it's available to watch on YouTube.
It's available to watch on YouTube. But I would recommend it to everyone listening because you get here 4 names in Japanese wrestling that are very important. And it's a perfect little snack tasting plate thing of all these different styles and all these different characters that are so influential even outside of Japan.
And it's funny because I think it was Ricky Choshu and Tenryu together, they feuded for many, many years, before and after this. And I think those two in particular, it was bringing out that extra level of toughness and meanness. You can even see it in this match how Tenryu goes from being kind of the second to being the guy who's taking the lead, and, almost showing that what he has worked on and is to graft to achieve that came to Jumbo a little bit more naturally, that's what the fans respond to more. And like grit, veteran status, determination, They call it the King's Road to heaven. Why is that? Because literally they're talking about, when they talk about the 4 pillars of King's Road, they're the 4 pillars of heaven. Because the idea is that they're on this journey to heaven.
What? That's so Lord of the Rings.
As legendary fighters and warriors, you know? And I think that obviously Tenryu himself wasn't one of those pillars, and this was before that was even a term, but if you want to see that style and so much of modern wrestling and something from 40 years ago,
long
man.
ago, yeah, that's
absolutely wild, excellent stuff. So obviously the team with Jumbo, and once there were so many battles fought together, it was only a matter of time before those two individuals ended up turning on one another. And the idea was that Jumbo, of course, still the star, still 1A as opposed to 1B. He starts getting more of the accolades. He's won his world championship, the triple crown, so to speak. And when that team splits up eventually, that sends Tenryu off this whole other path. He's no longer a guy who's standing up for Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta and what All Japan stands for. Now he's part of this self-determined revolution, and it's him against the world, and anyone he wants to jump on with. He has some young boys that he's taken under his wing. He even teams up with the likes of Stan Henson, and that in itself in the 80s in Japan was wild. The idea of a native-born star teaming with a gaijin, and particularly such a hated one like Henson.
It. Henson's like such a fucking... He's a scary guy. In Japan in the 80s, he is terrifying.
There is a match that we watched that I kind of was like, wanted to see something like what, obviously being regarded as a heel, because he's formed his own faction, much like Riki Choshu. He's an outsider. He's an interloper now. But we saw a match that was between Stan Henson and Tenryu as Revolution taking on Giant Baba, the legend, the old king of all Japan, and a guy called Rusher Kimura, who I could say is probably one of the stiffest looking, and I don't mean because he hits hard, old men. Like properly, like if you found a dusty old manga from the 60s and you opened it up, this man would be in there staring at you back, grizzled old toothless vet with a big beard. And it was Tenryu and Stan Henson brutalizing these two old men, and we didn't pick it as one of our matches to cover because it's kind of a squash.
Yeah,
but it really epitomized.
It's a great match. Yeah. Honestly, I loved it, and I do recommend you go and check it out because it's just very interesting to see how generous Baba is with the booking of this match, how they wrestle him, what he's capable of doing at that point. Considering his physicality,
he's older here.
He's old, and also he. I don't know if this is true, but he looks like he's in pain a lot of the time.
He's near the ropes for a lot of the moves that he's taking.
And, we're so used to, especially these days, watching matches with old lads doing their final kind of run, and they just can't go, and they have to protect their egos, so they don't do much. But oh my god, they powerbomb him.
They beat the fucking shit out of him.
Throw him out of the ring,
bust him up.
I loved as well Stan and Tenryu's tag moves. So good. It actually kind of reminded me a bit of The Shield. I'm sure there's a better comparison than that, but that's
they do the double powerbomb in fairness.
Yeah, I guess. My favourite one, though, was them Stan using Tenryu to whip Tenryu into the ropes to gain momentum so that Tenryu can run the ropes a couple of times to build up speed to knock out Giant Baba. And when that doesn't work, Stan's just like, fuck it. And he throws himself into the ropes, turning themselves into projectiles. It's so good.
So yeah, this idea now that Tenryu is not just that he's leveled up, he's seasoned, he's got a chip on his shoulder, he wants to kind of tear down something that he's helped build up. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the stories that you see play out on the screen or in the ring kind of reflect a lot of the tensions that were happening backstage. There were a lot of political tensions in Japanese wrestling in All Japan at that point in time as well. There were people who were, leaving from one company going to another. Anytime there's a wrestling war, there's always casualties along the way. And of course, one of those big casualties was the kind of the friendship and the bond between Jumbo Tsuruta and Tenryu. And that takes us on to our next match we're going to have a look at here. So Jumbo won the Triple Crown, and he had a series of matches with Tenryu after that where Tenryu was kind of constantly challenging him and trying to kind of prove that he was on his level. But the one that we're looking at here from 1989, this is something special indeed, folks. It's for the Triple Crown Championship. It's Tenryu taking on Jumbo Tsuruta, and a match that has at the beginning such production values. It blew my mind. you were following people backstage with the camera. Like,
Very modern.
yeah, people were doing that like 2024. They're like, hey, we're following Jey Uso from outside the ring, or we're following John Moxley from outside the arena. And
or even if you're going to be a bit more, I guess, severe with when it was first used, like in the West, like the Attitude Era, or slightly earlier.
Or Goldberg coming through and stuff.
The backstage segments in like kind of the 90s and stuff. But this is like late 80s. They're doing this stuff. And again, the camera work is fantastic. The quality of the camera work. Like, you could be forgiven watching a match from this time period and then a match from the year 2000 and thinking it was kind of the same time period. Because camera work didn't really improve much in that time in terms of like the quality of the cameras.
It's funny because if you were looking at a main event in like WWE or AEW and we decided to put a microphone on you before the main event and it was like a Moxley or a Cody Rhodes or a Rhea Ripley or a Mercedes Moné, whoever it is, they're going to give you a good strong line to send us out there, whatever it is. And you got both of these lads, Jumbo and Tenryu, and I think between the two of them in their pre-match interviews, they mutter like 4 syllables, I think. Tenryu's voice is incredible. I am obsessed with it. And I would like to thank my wife for providing me with some simple-to-read Japanese phrases so I can now do my impersonation for you. Ahem. そうですね。はい。ありがとうございます. Thank you very much.
Very good.
I will endeavor to learn more Japanese specifically so I can do what's with the voice? He's not a smoker, is he? Like, what happened?
No. So actually he grew up, as I said, on the farms near the fields and stuff. So his father owned a rice field, and I believe he also worked on a tobacco field. And working on the tobacco fields meant that his hands always smelt of tobacco, and actually gave him a mostly lifelong aversion to smoking. He didn't smoke until I think he smoked for like 4 years in his 50s when he kind of wound down from wrestling. But yeah, you're right. He has that gravelly voice that you just associate with like smoking 15 packs a day. Allegedly. Now, there's a lot about Tenryu which sounds too mythical to be true. For instance, there's a rumor that he would harden his head by headbutting dumbbells, or he'd have these like drinking contests with other wrestlers where they would drink as much as possible and then headbutt each other until one of them would collapse. So there's lots of like myth and rumor about it. But
I'm upset that the boys don't drink as much as they can and headbutt each other in the head anymore.
Yeah.
It's not the business that I recognize anymore.
The legend about his voice is that he received an especially bad lariat to the throat and it damaged his vocal cords. Now, that could well be true. Honestly, I don't really care to know if it's not, because I love that so much.
So I've noted throughout the research for Tenryu, because there is a lot of kind of like, tall tales.
Yes, that's wrestling.
That is wrestling, but I think in Japan in particular, I think a lot of the fans view it as a sign of respect if you help to embellish the legend. It's if you know it's definitely not true. It's not like, no, that's not true. He didn't get a lariat. He had throat surgery. It's more like, no, I love him and respect him.
Yeah.
And to maintain my love and respect, I'm going to perpetuate that story.
And I firmly believe that's the right attitude to have as a wrestling fan. Like, it's one thing to say to your friends, or like, if you're doing something like kind of more formal and research based or whatever, to be like, fair enough,
you want to find out,
whatever.
Yeah.
But I do think as fans, it's more of our responsibility is actually to keep kayfabe alive, to do the opposite of exposing the business and actually just protect the myth of the wrestler. I think that's the kindest thing you can do, and it's definitely what the wrestlers would prefer.
Well, the myth of Tenryu being a miserable bastard, I can tell you, he well and truly lived up to that. When he came out, he had a face like a slapped arse. There's this pus that develops on his face in the late 80s that we just watched his last match ever this morning against Okada. I don't think that look has left his face since that point. Like, fantastic. I love so much about the presentation, like the flags, the kind of the banners and stuff like that. People waving things around,
bringing
and all
in flowers and things like that. Having the confetti. There is, although we don't have the flash with regards to the characters and the costuming, we definitely have flash with regards to the presentation of the shows and the match itself.
And all that. Yeah,
I love that. I know I talked about the music earlier, but I have to quickly mention Jumbo's music here because I heard it. I was like, this is fantastic. I'm going to find out who did it so I can discover yet another great Japanese musician. Turns out Jumbo actually is singing on this. He didn't write it, but he did perform this song. And he actually apparently had a brief stint this is going to be a little spoiler if we ever do a Jumbo episode, but he did apparently release a couple of country albums, which I am desperate to find.
Look, if Terry Funk released an album in Japan, nothing's going to surprise me at this point. Like, you know, I'd be more like shocked if you didn't have an album if you were part of this scene back in the day.
I want Tenryu to have one with that voice.
When the going gets tough. I tell you now, having Stan the Distraction Henson stood ringside as the valet, I mean, I couldn't keep my eyes off him. But what was really funny as this match went on, I was keep expecting him to like, interfere or whatever. Even though I know that wasn't something that was typically done in these matches back in this promotion. He was so into this match, bless him.
He's just sitting there, like, paying really close attention, like, just invested.
While wearing a cowboy hat and a leather vest that has a skull and crossbones and a big hangman's noose with him. Yeah, you know, and he's there, like, watching.
He's not, like, performing. He's, like, learning.
So these two guys, as good as they were as partners, they are the most ideal opponents for one another. They both have speed and precision. There is, like, this kind of, I don't know, like almost psychic link between the two men, whatever it seems like. The fact that Tenryu can turn what is a forward run into a roll and pivot and turn, like as a man who's kind of in most people's mind is known as like an old man later on in his career, or kind of someone who is more limited mobility wise, kind of like a snappiness, I guess, to his movements more that I really like. That his style doesn't seem to link up with that. The fact that he's so hard-hitting, you know?
He doesn't perform in that way. It's not like that's his overall style.
Yeah.
His style is very slow and methodical, but it's just every so often, if it's to his advantage, then he'll use it to surprise his opponent.
I think with Jumbo as well, what's interesting about him is everything we said in that last match about, you know, Tenryu having a limited moveset. I think Jumbo feels like he's got like 3 moves to his name, but we were fawning over them because it looked so good. He got him in a headlock that was so tight that both Joe and Stone Cold Steve Austin at the same time were like, oh, goddamn. Yeah. That's that headlock there. The elbow, like things like elbow
Jumbo's
drops.
Elbow. Oh my God, it's so good. I love elbow drops, but fuck me, he does it spectacularly well because he's so big, he's so fast, and it looks. I don't know how they do that without hurting each other for real.
I think there's a lot of hurting each other for real in this.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big part of it, you know. And I know it was something that was said from Tenryu in an interview, which was that, you know, he felt that Brody and Stan Henson and those guys, when they came in, they kind of toughened these guys up. And then they were able to later on toughen up a later generation. But it's kind of like, I think that some people would be uncomfortable watching these types of matches.
I think if you are used to a modern WWE style, actually even a modern AEW style, you would be quite alarmed because it's not as
sanitized? I don't know. We have plenty of blood and stuff in AEW, don't get me wrong.
That's not, I don't really mean because it's I kind of mean safe but not safe.
There's a lot of head dropping. Like
that's it. It's risky.
Yeah.
It's very risky, and not in a way where we think of as modern viewers where it's like risky because they're doing such a fast work rate and so, you know, so quick and snappy. It's more just like, why would they do that? That looks so frightening.
All I'll say about this type of a style and the kind of the backdrops and the head landing frequently, hardly, and I always in my mind, I used to watch compilations of like Dr. Death, Steve Williams doing the backdrop driver in Japan and just be like, wow, he's just dropping people on their head, wow. And then around 5 or 6 years ago, I was like, that's just like, I'm just worked, right? It has to be safe. That style is just made to look a certain way. Then I saw Tomohiro Ishii, New Japan and an AEW mainstay. I saw a picture of him when he was younger, and his neck was like 9 times longer than it is now. And I realized, okay, that style does in fact have a neck-removing aspect to it, which I think some people, I think is fair warning. We're gushing about this stuff, but I think it's safe to say it might not be for everyone. I was surprised it was for you, to be honest, Joe, at this point.
I have like complicated feelings on this in a way.
They're both willing participants, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're passionate advocates for this style, so if anyone's going to do it, these two, let them have at it.
I do kind of feel with this style, if you are a well-informed person, you know the risks, because that's part of my worry with this stuff is obviously the neck injury, the spine injury, but also with CTE, stuff like that. Like at this time period, they had no idea the long-term impacts on repeated head injuries.
And if they did, I mean, who's to say how that would have impacted things?
Well, yeah.
I don't know, you know.
But I do think even still, I do believe in kind of personal responsibility, and if you really want to do that style, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily, you know, that you shouldn't be allowed to do that, but you should be allowed to take like a light tube to the head. Like, I think if you consent to that, that's fine and you should do it. But I do think part of the reason I was able to enjoy these matches so much is because they have already happened. I think now, if I was watching matches like this,
yes,
I would be so full of fear.
Because it's like, what's going to happen the next day? I'm on my phone checking to see if there's any updates.
Will they be all right?
Is there a GIF so I can see it again? What happens?
Because like in the moment, you're thinking ahead. You're thinking, well, I want to keep seeing this guy wrestle forever. And you don't know if that's going to happen. Now, obviously, watching a match in 1989 with Tenryu, you know he's going to be wrestling 40 years from now.
I think it's just about like the willingness of the participants, because, you know, Bryan Danielson, there's a wrestler that you and I were both going to go, there's a safe pair of hands, right? You know, he has his style, but like, I wouldn't say, you know, if I was to have a match with someone, I'd be like, I'd be confident enough that Bryan could get me through it, right? You know, he was a safe pair of hands in his day or whatnot. But like, I remember in the Young Bucks, in their autobiography, they talk about when they first took on Bryan, and they're like, the way they talked about him was the way that people spoke about Vader in Legend, whereas like he brutalized us. We tried to make him stop in the match, and it seemed to make him angrier, and we didn't know what happened. And afterwards, we were like, "What did we do?" And he's like, "What do you mean? We just had a great match, you know?" And like that for me was like mind blowing, because I thought, I respect all those guys as wrestlers. I would have thought, surely these guys could all, like, you know, have a good time in a wrestling ring, and it turns out that that's not necessarily always the case. But Jumbo and Tenryu seem to have a, you know, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but their relationship it transcends what happens in the wrestling ring. Those two are very, very close, and I think you can see there's smiles on the inside, even if there's grimaces and pissy, miserable faces on the outside in this match. But there was a lot of times in this match where I had no choice but just to laugh, because some of the offense was so stiff and so devastating. And, you know, in the era of cool super kicks, and then you kind of think afterwards, oh, did they slap a leather pant leg, or was there in some cases, I remember hearing we play sound effects for certain moves now and stuff like that.
Really?
And then seeing here, just like, well, that man's hands were on his hips and he kicked the guy in the face and it made a big slap noise. I think we can all figure out what happened there.
We have something quite unique to the other matches that we've seen here, where Jumbo Tsuruta works the crowd. And I don't know enough about All Japan or even Japanese wrestling at this time to know how rare this is. But within the matches that we have watched, both the ones that we are reviewing and the ones that we are not, I hadn't seen that at all across any of them. But he's working the crowd here. He raises up one hand every so often. And the crowd boo the shit out of him, which again is like, that wasn't happening much in the other matches that we saw. There wasn't much of that kind of heel work. And I don't even know if he's a heel here, or if he's just
the thing, is that
the context of the story. Like,
in the context of All Japan, Jumbo is the ace of the company. He's the champion. He represents tradition and Giant Baba and all that. So he is technically the good guy. And you know, Tenryu is Revolution, the outsider, the interloper and all that. And yet, because fans respect his grit and determination, and also they can see and respect when someone outgrows their position and eclipses someone else, that's when they start to turn on Jumbo. And it's crazy. It's I guess the parallels I would draw would be like a Brett and a Steve Austin. You go in expecting one thing, but you realize they've been telling the story a long time, and the fans are kind of already ahead of it. Like they know, they've decided that Jumbo's not their guy anymore. It's about Tenryu. And I think my refrain in this match was, Tenryu is still alive. This is all okay, because he got that lariat from Jumbo so many times. That head I thought was going to come clean off his shoulders. He busted that stuff in this match, so that I was shocked to see, like, he was diving to the outside, you know, he was mixing up submissions with strikes. Even as limited as the moveset was, and as kind of as straightforward as the style seems, it was very modern in many respects, in that he did things that were unexpected constantly throughout the match.
Something I found very modern about this match was that it's an ongoing theme within this match in particular, where Jumbo gets Tenryu ready for the pin, only for Tenryu to have such great ring awareness, his leg is already on the ropes.
Yeah.
And this happens like countless times in this match, and Jumbo just keeps not learning that he needs to drag Tenryu away from the ropes if he's going to try to go for the pin.
But like things how it make it different from like a modern match. You'd have a big move, you'd have the pin, then the kick out, the drama, and then maybe fans chant one more time, or the guy elects to do it again. But like there's a moment in this where Jumbo does this big knee off the top rope right onto Tenryu's head, and he just gets up and he does it a second time, and before you can even blink, and he's done it a third time.
Yeah.
It is wild.
But again, it's so out of his normal repertoire. I don't think we saw that in any of the matches he did.
I think like the selling in Tenryu's end of things,
Fantastic.
and yeah, he's like a freaking brick wall with a face drawn on it most of the time. But that means that when it comes to he's gonna scream now he's wincing in agony,
And also
it takes you back.
It's a big part. He does that intentionally because he believes that as a legitimate fighter, you wouldn't give away fear or pain to your opponent, because that's giving them something they can use against you, and that doesn't make sense. So the only times he ever will sell visually, like facially, is when his opponent has pulled it out of him, like they've really, like, against his will, as it were.
He's got quite the poker face, so to speak. But yeah, the stoicism adds so much to the moments where there is peril, or whatever you want to call it. You have the knee pad coming down then from Jumbo, which is like nothing but bad news, essentially.
I love that, because Jumbo, he pulls down the knee pad and he does this, like, I think he's going for the running knee, and Tenryu spits at him and ducks out of the way. It's the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. It's so cool. I've never seen it like ever before, and I love that. So the idea of using a spit as a little taunt.
I know, yeah.
I mean, we see,
and it discombobulates, so it works.
We see spitting all the time in American wrestling.
But they do it. You spit to get, like, you do it because you spit. People go, you spit.
It's a spot in of itself.
But this was part of the fight.
Yeah.
You spit to get you go, what? And then bam, he hits you with the move. And I love when he hits him with the enzigiri, Jumbo no-sells it, which again feels like a very modern thing to happen in the match, which you wouldn't expect maybe for us. From our vantage point of like going back to 80s wrestling, the big move, one of the signature moves, and then the guy is still on his feet. We get the power bomb and a rare kick out, and the audience scream.
There is one girl in particular. There are a lot of girls, I think, in general in the audiences here. I wonder if it's because of Tenryu still being considered very handsome, or if it's just that there's I know there is a large female fan base.
That's what I say. Like,
in general.
Southern America and Japan, like the split of, it's a much more gendered split of fans than you would expect.
But there is a young female fan, kind of in, like, not quite the front row, but in the front rows, who is like screaming her lungs out like she's watched the Beatles for the first time.
I think she was going to climb over the ring at one point, like, you
attack
know.
someone, yeah. And that's so fucking cool as well. I love the idea of just like.
And then in the midst of all this screaming, the second powerbomb comes. And what I love so much is that the powerbomb never looks flush, it never looks particularly nice. And I love is that when the second one has to come out, the second one is a mighty struggle, because he's probably given most of what he has to get that first one on. The second powerbomb comes, Tenryu finally picks up the victory. Jumbo attempts a handshake twice after the match. Tenryu doesn't even look at him.
Wow.
And what was wild about this was that I was trying to read up online, being like, kind of, was that part of the story? I saw someone commenting on one of the videos being like, oh no, they had real life heat apparently. And apparently the heat was because Tenryu wanted there to be blood in the match and Jumbo didn't bleed. But the reason Jumbo didn't bleed is because he had found out at that point that he had hepatitis. So he didn't want to do that, but there was miscommunication.
I think as well, it was like, he was quite private about it.
That's it, you know, but it just kind of like, I don't know, like I on the journey we'd been on with them, like together as a team, they felt like such a harmonious unit, and then just to see it go from that, where the guy was like, look, we just had a hell of a fight, I just want to shake your hand, you're the better man, and he won't even, oh baby, that got me right in the feels.
Yeah, Tenryu and Jumbo, when I was researching for this episode about kind of their friendship, it was interesting. There was a lot of kind of contradictions, because, and I don't know if part of this is that maybe they changed, like Tenryu maybe changed his mind, or if it's a case of like protecting kayfabe, as it were.
Probably, yeah.
But there were a lot of instances where Tenryu was talking about issues he had with Jumbo's lifestyle and things like that. Like, for instance, when they would go out and eat, this is like, you know, classic wrestling, similar to kind of the Western classic wrestling with maintaining kayfabe and keeping an image of a star. In Japan, there's a lot of culture around food and and star power.
Yeah, the Ribera Steakhouse jacket. Come on, you know,
exactly.
that's synonymous with Japanese wrestling.
And when Tenryu and Jumbo would go out, like, he noticed that Jumbo, one of his favorite foods was, I think, forgive me if I'm wrong with this, but I believe it was like ramen. It was some kind of very cheap food, very easy to make, and he would often eat that. And Tenryu overheard fans at a table going, wait, isn't that Jumbo Tsuruta? Isn't he supposed to be a big star? How is he supposed to get big and strong on ramen? That doesn't make sense. He must not be a big deal at all. And that apparently was like kind of became a bit of a kind of fundamental part of Tenryu's opinion on how to present yourself as a star, is that it's not just about how you present yourself in the ring. It's also about, you know, if fans see you in real life, what are they going to think about you?
Yeah.
Knowing that they're going to see you as the wrestler, not yourself. So from then on, he would always make sure if he was eating out and about, he would be eating beef, fine foods, like rich in proteins and stuff like that. And he was quite condescending to Jumbo and be like, kind of like, oh, he's not a real athlete or a real star because he doesn't understand the significance of presenting yourself like a champion. And there's like so many instances of him talking about Jumbo that way, so that you kind of get the idea of, oh, maybe he didn't really like him. But then when Jumbo died, Tenryu, he would visit his grave often, as like many times as he possibly could.
And Jumbo did die quite young.
He did.
I was, you know,
yeah.
I was very sad to find out that fact, because one of the reasons we're doing this episode is because of the thing, you know, I'd heard from some Japanese fans about like, oh, we kind of feel like maybe Tenryu might be kind of a bit forgotten. And if Tenryu's kind of being a bit forgotten, he had such a much longer career and he's still alive. You know, Jumbo Tsuruta is someone who, you know, that is doubly applicable for, you know?
So, you know, I think it's easy to kind of be like, oh, maybe they didn't like each other. But as I said, he would visit his grave often. And at his final visit to the grave...
You're going to make me cry. Stop that.
Yeah, I'm going to make myself cry. He decided he couldn't visit anymore. And so in 2015, he drew a line under his visit and he sat by Jumbo's graveside and said, the next time we meet will be when I come over to your side.
Oh, man.
So I think it probably was, you know, maybe he believed that he didn't present himself as a champion, but I don't think he didn't love him very much.
Oh, no, I think that's all, you know, protect the business, kid, you know, all that jazz. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I love seeing moments in time in wrestling like that where you can see someone, you know, finally like has outshone at clips, and that's a huge part of the storytelling, not just in All Japan but in Japanese wrestling. The idea that someone finally manages to kind of eclipse someone else, and you've been there on that journey. When people talk about long-term storytelling in wrestling, I don't think they all necessarily mean loads and loads of backstage segments where you make oblique references to storylines that you're like, are these still going on or not? Or you do a promo here and there where like, don't think I've forgotten about this thing that you and I said 3 months ago. It's about seeing someone's evolution in the ring and their style evolve and their position evolve and their confidence, all these things. A lot of it's kayfabe, a lot of it is actually you as a fan can suspend your disbelief about that a lot easier when you can see their real-time improvements and their status change. So I think that's kind of how Japanese wrestling has so readily been able to create these long stories. You know, if you look at the likes of an Okada or a Naito, people who follow their careers for so long, it's like, Jesus Christ, like, you see, like, the stories aren't just kind of, oh, he did this, this, and this. The story is the tenure of watching them, of seeing them. And, you know, you can get those glimpses and those snapshots when you go back and see these incredible moments in time like this. I really want to know your match rating for this absolute classic. They wrestled many times. This one's considered to be one of their best.
Is this a 5-star from Dave?
It could be, Joe. It could well be.
Well, it's a 5-star from me.
Oh!
I love this match. It's a perfect match. The work rate is so... I mean, my God, these guys move... They do so much in this match, considering,
Non-stop.
Again, you think of classic wrestling, you don't necessarily think of a fast work rate.
And now when you say, like, non-stop action, now when you hear... If I say that phrase non-stop action other than TNA, you probably think of, like, guys springboarding and guys, like...
flips and shit.
When it's non-stop action, but the action is, like, fucking axe handles and lariats and clubbing blows and all that, like, it's a different... It's not really something you see in modern wrestling anymore.
But also the power of their moves. You know, you've got two legitimate athletes here just like pounding the shit out of each other. It feels like a real fight. The pacing of this match, like, you know, if you do care about psychology, this has it in spades.
Because Jumbo never lost in singles matches. Like, this was considered to be, huge that he lost clean in the middle of the ring without some sort of like, an excuse or a partner to take the fall or whatever it is. So, that is, Tenryu being crowned, so to speak, at this point in more ways than one.
And it's so funny because after a couple of Tenryu's wins, he will do a post-match interview. And I say that, I guess, in the most general of terms.
Tenryu, the fans want to hear from you. You're the new All Japan Pro Wrestling Triple Crown champion. What do you got to say? Arigato gozaimasu. A man of few words.
Yep.
Dangerous man is Tenryu.
Yeah.
So we head into 1990. And there are litany of reasons for why this happened. One of the main ones being the almighty powerful force in wrestling, money. But Tenryu is in conversations with and is ultimately lured away from Giant Baba's All Japan Pro Wrestling. Another thing which, probably ultimately helps that heel persona, the Revolution stable, that idea of him as an outsider, because it's something you didn't leave. You didn't leave Giant Baba.
Yeah, and you don't leave sumo.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, these are things you don't do.
Yeah.
Like, the idea is that, like, leaving a company in Japan at that point in time was kind of always controversial to an extent. But if you decided to leave Antonio Inoki's New Japan, usually the fans would be like, I get it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. He's a bit weird.
He's fucking insane and probably stealing money off of you, or probably holding some legitimate reason. But like, I remember like, in the Terry Funk episode, Terry and Dory, they were loyal to Baba till the end.
Yeah.
Like, there was a lot of people who never left Baba because, the comparison to a king, like, is very, very apt, because people like literally swore fealty to the man because he was very generous, and because he had long established links with the NWA and all that. It felt like, he was someone who was strong and steady and stable. You don't leave him; he'll treat you good. He is pivotal not just for this company, but for the relationship between Japan and the West. But of course, as the explosion of wrestling in the West in the mid to late 80s happens, there's a lot of eyes over in the West looking into Japan and ways to make money in there. And one of the companies that forms up with a view to perhaps starting one of these many, many crossovers is SWS, Super World of Sports, whose tagline, accompanied by a cool picture of a dinosaur, is straight and strong. And yes, I cannot wear that as a t-shirt, I've realised. Because
no.
Some people might see that and be like, yeah, I'm a homophobe too.
No.
So yeah, the idea was that there was this billionaire who owned one of the top glasses manufacturing companies in Japan. He wanted to get into wrestling. First port of call was they're going to buy the UWF, which is that kind of shoot fighting group that we talked about in the Vader and Ken Shamrock episodes. They didn't want to be bought, so they set up their own company, which was SWS, which had a lot of money pumped into it, and signed Tenryu as its top star. And they also, as well, paid him an insurmountably large amount of money. Tenryu at this point was one of the top 5 paid wrestlers in the world, making nearly $1 million. It was like 850, 900 grand or something thereabouts. In at that time, it's like, for inflation, I imagine that's insane now.
Yeah.
So obviously big business indeed, but SWS was notable for the fact that they were ready to set up a crossover with the World Wrestling Federation and Vince McMahon, who initially tried to lowball Antonio Inoki and say, yeah, we'll set up a crossover officially with you guys, because they had done some crossover stuff here and there.
Yeah, I heard that Inoki was one of the original investors in WrestleMania.
Yeah,
Apparently
yeah.
he loaned Vince a bunch of money on the agreement that then Vince would work with him eventually, which Vince then turned around later and was like, nah, I don't want to.
Yeah, the whole relationship between Inoki and Vince is so funny, because it's literally like both guys being like, ha ha, idiot, and then telling their extremely loyal fan base going, yeah, don't worry, we're top, that guy's just some fucking jabroni, don't worry about him. Like literally Antonio Inoki be like wrestling a match in Madison Square Garden, like, don't worry about that, we're just doing a thing, don't worry, it's fine, So apparently, as legend has it, to provide a link for an upcoming episode, one of the reasons Antonio Inoki turned down the crossover with Vince's WWF at that point in 1990 was that Vince is like, I'll send you over all my top guys, Antonio, like Bo and Blue, the Beverly Brothers, and the Bushwhackers, and the Brooklyn Brawler. But which one will we be doing an episode about soon?
Ooh.
How to Brooklyn Brawler.
Yeah.
It's definitely that one. So yeah, insulted by that notion, they decided to do the crossover with SWS instead. And it was immediately a subject of ridicule for the long-term fans in Japan. because no more so than people labeled Tony Khan when he started AEW, it's a money mark promotion, Joe.
Yeah.
What's a money mark promotion in your estimation? What does that mean?
Well, it is a thing in wrestling for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I don't want to say that Tony is one.
No, absolutely not. No.
I mean, I guess, but he has a lot of money and he is a mark. But like, I think the term money mark more refers to, and you see it a lot in indie wrestling, guys who come from outside of wrestling. They've made a lot of money, maybe in finance or property, and they go, "Oh, I've always wanted to put my own wrestling show," and then they just pump loads of money into it, but they mismanage the promotion,
and they're usually taken advantage of as well. Like,
and also are taking advantage of others.
Yeah, there's usually kind of a lack of know-how, either the business side of things, or more frequently, there's a lack of know-how about like the wrestling itself.
Yeah,
and there's the advantages taken, and things spiral out of control. People often will label a company that is kind of, in free fall or whatever, that happens to have a lot of investment as a money mark promotion. But this was literally like a guy being like, I'm a billionaire, I want my own wrestling company.
Yeah.
And he got one. And they hit the ground hard because they were running shows in the Tokyo Dome with crowds of 60,000 people or thereabouts.
How do they do that then?
You could get free tickets to SWS if you bought glasses.
Are you serious?
The opticians. So imagine, if you will, if, like, I don't know, lens crafters in America, or, I don't know, Specsavers here, bought TNA, I guess, and then put on shows in Wembley Stadium. But if you went in for an eye check, you get a free pair of tickets.
Wow.
And a lot of fans will be like, look, it's $20 to get an eye test or a pair of eyeglasses. It's a bargain. So people would go in and buy a couple of pairs of glasses and get loads of tickets.
Amazing.
So they managed to fill them out, and they had, a lot of really bananas, like, hard to fathom crossovers. You want to see The Undertaker wrestle in the Tokyo Dome and get people to go, whoa, when they see him sit up? Or you want to see Macho Man Randy Savage fight Tenryu? Or you want to see Ric Flair fight Tenryu? Or you want to see Hulk Hogan fight Tenryu? Now, we had to make a decision early on, which is like, we could have very easily filled our boots just watching Tenryu matches against guys from the West that we had done episodes on previously, and we thought that we would be kind of boxing ourselves in.
It's kind of missing the point, I think. What's the point of doing an episode on a Japanese legend if you then ignore the context and his compatriots that helped make him who he was?
Yeah, so I think, like, I would recommend, if you folks want to see some spectacular
Hogan
stuff.
Match.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Now, we didn't think it'd be very much in service of us as podcasters or a Tenryu episode to spend 20 or 30 minutes gushing about a great Hulk Hogan match that we saw.
But it is really good.
It's a really good match. But that crossover did extend to, Tenryu got to appear in WWF a couple of times.
I hear he showed up in a Rumble.
Yeah, he was one of the final five in one of the Royal Rumbles one year. He had a match at WrestleMania. He was brought in as, like, Mr. Fuji's hitman. Was one of the many wrestlers who helped bury The Undertaker alive in his casket match against Yokozuna. So, and that was funny because it, like, you can watch these WWF shows and it's like, that's Tenryu! He's from Japan!
Or Tendu is the one that they often let foreigners say because they couldn't say the sound.
And Bobby Heenan would be like, yeah, gorilla, they eat a lot of rice over there, or whatever stupid racist shit they would probably say about a Japanese wrestler like that.
Yeah.
The wild thing about that is, though, that Bobby Heenan, folks, actually wrestled Tenryu in, like, 1984. He did a tour of Japan, wrestled tag matches with Tenryu, with Billy Robinson and Dick Slater and all that. Wild stuff indeed. But yeah, I don't think Tenryu was ever explained to the American audience when he appeared over there, other than, he's a star from another country, brain!
I don't think you can explain a character like that. You just have to see it, and that means you have to have really strong booking, and you're never going to get that in a Vince McMahon company with a foreigner.
No, and a lot of the times when Vince McMahon would do that crossover stuff, it's kind of like, look, see, I featured your guy.
Yeah, what more do you want?
What more do you want? But, like, a lot of people would have watched those shows. They probably couldn't tell you who he was, other than, I know, some Japanese guy they brought in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the death knell of a lot of collaborations, when the person is brought in just because you can say to the person, look, I brought him in, didn't I? I did what I said.
And also, it's like, at that particular time in the WWF as well, it was so over the top and cartoony and kind of, actually, I would say, marketed to children.
Yeah.
And Tenryu just doesn't fit that vibe. The only way I think it could work is if you intentionally promoted him as as an outsider who doesn't fit that mold and is therefore like a heel for it, because like, oh, how dare he not, do a little funny dance and wear a costume for the children? Like, he's just a normal guy who's scary.
We don't need these Japanese guys. We've got our American, Hawaiian, Japanese guys who aren't even Japanese. Like, what ends do you require them? But I think the big issue with SWS, other than the fact that they were pumping in millions and getting like thousands out of it, it was about like, hey, look, we can fill the Tokyo Dome. Isn't that great? It was at a point in time where the Japanese wrestling market was getting quite saturated. And also, Tenryu, as a top guy, was just too willing to help out and lose, and he lost a lot. As like, you're going to build a promotion around a guy, and he was hot as hell. He bet Jumbo Tsuruta he was, top of the world. But being willing to lose, and he wanted to put over a lot of the younger guys, or the guys who are on the way up, because a huge problem that they were having in Japan at that time, and a problem that would persist well into the 90s, was not having younger stars underneath. So he's ahead of the curve in some senses, trying to help build up people, but at the same time, the promotion didn't have enough direction to be able to have their top guy lose and not kind of lose their arse at the same point.
I think, again, that's an issue with having a promoter who isn't a wrestler or hasn't worked in the business, is because you have to understand the mindset of promoting to understand the careful balancing act of getting over new stars but not giving away the legend and the legacy of your top guys.
There's so many instances as well. It happened here with this. It happened with Baba and the NWA, and they actually ended up splitting their arrangement because of it, where, they would be promised on the Japanese end, hey, yeah, don't worry, Ric Flair is going to drop the title to this guy, or, in one case, Tenryu was meant to, they advertised him versus Hogan, and everyone had been told, oh, don't worry, Hogan he's actually losing. And you had all the journalists who'd been given the inside scoop had all the stories written ready to go, saying, Tenryu beats Hogan in a big match or whatever it was. And then Hogan arrives and goes, no, that's work for me, brother. And Tenryu straight away diffuses the situation. Don't worry, I'll lose. It's fine.
Yeah.
And Tenryu, like, in a very good match, loses clean to Hulk Hogan. And it's kind of, it makes them end up looking foolish and at the expense of a group that doesn't seem to care either way.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a lot of the history of that kind of Western, like, link. And, like, there's so much you could have done that they opted not to do. But they got away with it because I don't think the fans had much appetite in America at that point in time for Japanese stars to be brought in.
I think they could have done. I think if you had him booked properly, it could have worked really well.
Oh, good. Because... I mean, watch any of the matches with the top stars, and you could go. An American audience would have freaked out if they saw that Tenryu versus Macho Man match that we saw.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, in terms of like his presentation, I think there's a lot of comparisons between like him and Brett.
Yeah.
Because Brett's also not flashy or particularly showy or anything like that, and he was booked fantastically well.
Yeah.
It's just I don't think Vince is going to do that to a guy who can't speak English.
And also as well, I think in Japan at this point in time, wins and losses did matter a lot. Compared to America, where I think that maybe, other than if you're super protected or whatever, but like, Macho Man lost all the time, Ric Flair lost all the time. It didn't like stop them being icons or stars. But I think if you're trying to start a company and Tenryu is losing as the figurehead of that company, a very well paid loser at that. And it kind of is a bit acrimonious at this point because you got this company that's now failed and you can't go back to old Japan because Baba has said he will not return to this company as long as I'm alive.
Literally over my dead body.
Yeah, because of the betrayal that was, the slight that it was seen. And I think that's as much to kind of keep up appearances amongst the other people that, yes, this is what happens if you leave. Even if you're a top star like Tenryu, if you leave, you betray me, you're not welcome back here.
Yeah.
And certainly New Japan wasn't a home for him. So he starts Wrestling and Romance, officially the coolest name company in the history of wrestling. War. What is it good for? Well, lots of things, apparently.
I was very fascinated by the use of the word romance.
I couldn't find out why it was used. They did change it later on in its life to be like, I think
they just changed it to just the acronym, just war.
Instead, yeah.
As far as I could tell, and I couldn't find anyone actually speaking about it specifically, but as far as I could tell, the meaning of the word romance, especially in Japan at like the 80s and maybe even a bit earlier.
I assumed it didn't mean what we assume it to mean as romance.
Yeah, I don't think it means in terms of like romantic relationships or love. It's more like high drama, passion.
Right, okay.
That type of thing.
Because we say these were very unromantic matches that we watched.
Yeah, I was expecting kissing, I got none of that.
But the thing about War that was really cool was that it was by no means a major company, but it was joining a very stuffed roster of, there were a lot of companies in Japan at the time, everyone trying to offer kind of a lot of different things, whereas War was trying to be as collaborative as possible. War had crossovers and collaborations with FMW, if you remember from our ECW episode, and Terry as well. That was the barbed wire exploding deathmatch extravaganza company. WWF, they managed to continue that whole collaboration. That is one of the main reasons that War was able to continue, is that Vince still wanted to have his hand on something in Japan, and they would send over stars there. We got to see Tenryu versus fucking Yokozuna in War.
That was good.
Which is like watching Kofi Kingston wrestle in Jamaica, I guess, or Razor Ramon wrestle in Cuba. Just really wild stuff. They did stuff with UWF. They even did crossover stuff with New Japan as well, including an instance where Tenryu went to New Japan, fought Inoki, and beat him.
Wow.
Which was mind-blowing to me, trying to get my head around how that happened. And it just apparently spoke to the level of Tenryu's celebrity, his status as a cultural figure, and also kind of the willingness to people that wanted to work with this very collaborative-minded wrestling group. I don't think there's any company that's quite like this.
No, and it's interesting actually as well with how he formed the company, because I think with War, you start to see a lot more of Tenryu's attitudes towards booking philosophy, towards treating people in general, like foreigners, but also juniors. He actually formed the company with his wife's brother. And his wife is one of those people that's like, she doesn't show up in history books necessarily, at least not in the West, but she was such an integral part of his career.
This happens so many times on the podcast, doesn't it? Where we're like, oh, by the way, that wrestler you love, their wife basically made the whole thing happen.
Except unlike with most wrestlers in the West, and maybe I'm just thinking of people like Nash here, but he would often... he would talk about his wife, and he would bring her to events, and she would happily come along. She was not just, she wouldn't just manage his finances and the household. She helped
with the promotion and all that.
She would help with promoting, She'd go on TV shows and be interviewed and things. They'd go to premieres together. She was, as much part of his promotional events as he was. And he trusted her hugely with regards to certain business elements. She'd actually designed the logo for the Ryuken Cup. If you look at the calligraphy, it's gorgeous. She's obviously very artistic, very talented. And it was just very sweet to see that he cared a lot about keeping this starting off at least as a family-run business, where it was just kind of all hands on deck. Who do I know? Who I can bring into this, who I can work with me, who I trust, who we're all loyal together.
With a view to kind of helping the industry as much as it is to helping the company itself, which again feels like a rarity, particularly when you hear the phrase promoter / top star, and immediately you go, because there's not many people where they've held that position and they don't get regarded as being awful in some respects by most fans. Whereas Wrestling and Romance is, even though it wasn't the most successful company, the wrestlers themselves who worked there, they speak so highly of it. Wrestling historians point to it as being so pivotal in not just kind of maintaining existing relationships like crossovers with America, but for instance, the Super Junior Cup, which was a really important tournament that happened originally in New Japan way back in the day, that was formed by Jushin Thunder Liger, helped introduce a lot of lightweights, junior heavyweights, etc. to a wider audience. And on that spirit, Tenryu basically let a guy called Ultimo Dragon, very important figure in Japanese and Mexican wrestling. He said, hey, let's do another Super Junior Cup. The book is yours. Take the pencil. You book it. And he brought in everyone from Chris Jericho, Lance Storm, Psychosis, Rey Mysterio, people who had not really had much of any exposure at all outside of their home countries. And he's now showing them onto this whole wide new platform. That Super Juniors Tournament 2 is considered to be all-time classic. We will be doing it for a pay-per-view classic, absolutely, because I think it'll tie in nicely with this. But that was done with the idea of helping those performers and helping the business. You can probably go back to our ECW episode or our Eric Bischoff episode and hear us talk about how genius those men were to let someone like a Conan or whoever bring in all these guys. And it's well, where do you think they got the idea in the first place? These guys were often looking to Japan, seeing what they were doing. And you mentioned Lance Storm, but I read interviews with him talking about his time in War and his time with Tenryu when he was fairly young in his career, and nothing but positive things to say. Tenryu used to ride in the bus with the wrestlers. He would, if you were a foreigner, he would make sure that you were, because he knew from being a foreigner himself in America back in the day, how hard it was. Chris Jericho in his book talked about how Tenryu would help him find a hotel where he could stay 30 days at a time so he wouldn't go over his tourist visa. And like literally like, can you imagine a Vince McMahon doing the paperwork for your fucking visa? Not at all, and he's hands-on and he cared about these guys. And I think it's a beautiful, rare thing in wrestling.
He is so unique as a promoter in wrestling specifically because he's so generous with his time, with his attitude towards respecting everyone, but also in terms of like his attitude to money. And this is something that he took from his time in sumo, but also from he was quite inspired by Ric Flair, of all people. He had seen legends in both industries, who would give money to people they worked with, or people had helped them, or people even who just needed money. He was always more than happy. He would be giving money away constantly. His roster on War, he would give them, like, on top of their salary, which was already extremely good considering it was a small promotion, he would give them pocket money on top of that. Lance Storm, who, I mean, if you know anything about Lance Storm, he's a man of few words, and he tends to be very precise with what he says. He never exaggerates. He's not an effusive individual. No. If he likes someone, normally the best you'll get out of him is like a kind of a terse, like, yeah, I like them. With Tenryu, he says that out of all the bosses he's ever had, he's easily the best. He said out of 10, he would give him an 11.
He's the only promoter he's ever worked for where he was given a raise or a bonus.
Yep.
There was one time that they were doing a match apparently, and Tenryu's and all these like old vets are in the match, and Lance is in there, and they done the match on the tour all throughout the for like a month or whatever, and at the end of the tour he's like, right, everyone listen, Lance is the veteran now. Lance, you put together the match.
Yeah.
And he would like, all these legends like, yeah, let's defer to you. And Lance credits that with being like how he was able to then, he's one of the most prolific trainers and agents in wrestling. He credits that with giving him the confidence to be like, oh, I can put together matches. I can tell people how to do something better or to improve or whatnot.
Great to do it as well with people who speak a different language from you. That's such an important skill. And Tenryu as well, he'd pay for everyone's meals. And of course, from his time in sumo, he understood the importance of appearances, looking like eating like a champion, but also being able to eat proteins and stuff. So he would pay for these elaborate steak or lobster dinners for everyone.
Hell of a boss.
There was one time when Lance had, I believe it was his first child, and his wife had to get put into labour, and Lance was still in Japan at the time. So he was kind of constantly on the phone to his wife, being like, checking in, like, are you okay? Has it started yet? And Tenryu, every single day on the bus, he would check in with Lance. Is the baby here yet? Is the baby here yet? And every time Lance would be like, not yet, not yet. And then finally the baby arrived, and Lance got to tell Tenryu the good news. And Tenryu firmly shook his hand and said, congratulations. And then when Lance pulled his hand away, there was $1,000 in it.
Amazing.
And that's just like what Tenryu would do. He would give you money at any opportunity because he had it. Why not? Spread it around. It makes everyone happier and more loyal.
But that's it. It's not like the Ric Flair thing where it's like, I'm doing that because I want to keep the party going.
That's it. No, it was always quite... It was understated. He wouldn't make a big deal out of it.
And here I'm going, you've beaten Inoki and Baba. You're like the only man in history to do that. You don't need to do shit. You can just be a legend on your throne and be adored by the,
not who it fundamentally, he's not like that. He believes he has his principles and he's stuck with them his entire career.
So he decided to have a look at one of the many collaborations and crossovers with War, and, there were plenty to choose from. But nothing quite enticed us, quite like maybe having a little bit of a look at someone who I think you and I, one of the favourite matches we've ever covered in this podcast.
Would love to do an episode on him.
Oh boy, would I ever. So we decided to look at when War crossed over with FMW and Tenryu took on the one and only Onita, who appeared in our Terry Funk episode, Joe. Give a little snapshot of who Onita is for people who may not listen to the Terry episode or don't know who he is.
He, I believe, innovated the exploding barbed wire death match.
Cool.
The match we saw with Terry, to this day, I think is one of my favourite matches I've ever seen.
Yes, the match that ends with like the most emotional, goddamn perfect shot in the history of wrestling.
A movie. It's so good.
Go check out the Terry episode. You gotta find out about that. But yes, this match was instigated at a press conference where Onita, excited about the upcoming FMW wrestling and romance crossover, presented Tenryu, his elder, with a beautiful VHS collection of his best matches so he could see what FMW and exploding barbed wire death matches matches were all about. And without even blinking, Tenryu crushed the tape in his hands. And with that, we go to Tenryu versus Onita, FMW 1994, an exploding barbed wire death match in a cage.
Now, I was very excited to watch this because of Tenryu's background in sumo. I figured would lend itself very well to the nature of, with these matches, you don't want to touch the ropes at all. That's really bad because the ropes explode.
Yes, not good.
So immediately he's on this kind of, he's lowering his center of gravity. He's got that sumo stance and he's trying to like just push Onita into the barbed wire ropes. And Onita's selling is so good and he's constantly glancing back to see how close he is from the barbed wire. Like he's terrified.
Onita, despite being revered as like a hardcore legend and an icon and one of the toughest, most violent men in the history of wrestling, he looks nervous at the start of this match. And
I love that because it makes sense. The match type means he should be.
So if he's nervous, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
That's usually how it goes. And Tenryu just looks kind of pissed off, you know?
The setting is romantic as hell.
Yes.
You've got this, it's a sunset. The sky is kind of a blushing pink and orange.
Yes, the way the sun rays hit the barbed wire and bombs is absolutely beautiful, Joe.
You've got wind blowing through Onita's hair.
You've got the most jacked up, incredible ring announcer ever. This guy gives it socks. He screams at the top of his lungs.
He sounds like he's doing a voice for like a villain in a cartoon.
Yes, and it got me amped up. You need to hear this man. Again, this one up on YouTube. Check out the website. There'll be links. You can find it yourself as well. The thing about Onita is that he has this pervasive like battle damage on him at all times. He's like kind of like Sabu in the sense that he'll come out, there's usually one part of him that is like inoperable or, you know, is covered in bandages. In this case, all from the shoulder all the way down his arm. He is covered in bandages. He's wrapped up in gauze. And that's like probably a shoot because anytime Onita takes any sort of damage, a spider web of blood explodes on his body. It's like he is been battered and taken apart so many times. He also has the same colour scheme as my childhood teddy bear, Teddy Wolf, who unfortunately had been through almost as many scrapes as Onita. So I got extra emotional when I see Onita got beat up because it reminds me of that one time that I ran downstairs with Teddy Wolf and I go, yay! Because he used to rub his face up against the range.
Oh,
do you
God.
ever have a range? You know, range?
I'm not rich enough.
Well, no, this isn't a rich. This is the home where I used to go after school. It was like proper old Irish farmhouse. There'd be a range there to cook and heat the house, and sometimes it would be cooling, and I would run Teddy Wolf on it, and it'd be nice and warm. And one time I came down, and it was on full blast. I rubbed Teddy Wolf on it, and he burst into flames. So when Onita was like in flames in this match, I was like, no. What if he gets non-matching googly eyes like Teddy Wolf did?
Yeah, Onita here especially is very cute. He's quite, I don't know if this is actually how far into his career this is, but he looks still quite young. It's before, he's got a bit of battle damage to like his ears.
But you can still see that handsome young man.
Yeah, the face is
behind
still,
there. You know, there's kind of like a beautiful tragedy to him, like just throwing his body. Like, imagine if, like, you know, because Mick Foley always, like, even as a young Cactus Jack Manson, he always had that kind of like gnarled, evil, bad bastard.
And it was always,
when he has a kind of a sweet innocence to him.
Yeah, and Mick, he always presented himself as kind of like reckless, whereas Onita, it's what I love so much about his performances is that even though he's like this kind of deathmatch wrestler almost, he always looks scared, and you feel like the threat is just as real as it actually kind of is, because he always looks very nervous and like he doesn't really want to be there.
Because he knows he's been blown up. That's the thing. Like, you know, Tenryu has this kind of like, I can't believe I'm in this fucking match vibe to him, and Onita's like, I am in this match. I've been in many of these matches, and I continue to hate being blown up and ripped to shreds. And what I love about FMW, something that, you know, the comparisons to ECW are often made because of the hardcore and the violence and the fire and the barbed wire and kind of giving into the fans, you know, desires of certain weapons being used, being very kind of fan forward. But so much of what makes FMW exciting in my mind is that camera work. You get these zooms in on the men's faces. Like the first 5 minutes of this match is mostly them kind of just feeling each other out. Tenryu being kind of adamant, we're just going to wrestle in the middle of the ring, never mind all these gimmicks about to blow up beside us.
Yeah.
But when you get those like zooms on the camera, like that's for me where the real magic starts to happen, because you can see like the bead of sweat coming off Tenryu's face when he realizes that, oh, I'm getting kind of close here now.
Yeah.
This thing is actually going to blow up. And it feels like you can't say exploding barbed wire anything these days in American wrestling because of the big fuck up that happened in AEW, that most people think this is kind of a silly gimmick.
Yeah.
But for me, I'll always view it as being something that's like the high. It's like the bombs are kind of silly, but like the selling of it, and it's cool, and these. When Onita gets just fucked into this bomb, he's smouldering when he falls to the ground.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's very cool.
And the loud boom is so fucking earth-shattering that you hear the audience, like you see them all putting their hands on their ears. I think the reason they're in an outdoor stadium is because they're letting off bombs in the middle of this. Joe asked me when we were watching this match, have we watched much FMW before? And I go, do you remember the Sabu episode where they lit the ring ropes on fire and then immediately had to evacuate the building because the ring was on fire? Yeah. Casual face kicks from Tenryu to Onita. Onita bleeds the way you should clean your house, little and often. You know, little parts. What? You should clean your house little and often.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And he'll, bit come up here, bit on his arm, bit on his shoulder, bit in his face. He just gig straight away and have a crimson mask. It's a cumulative all over the body thing that you get going on here. Tenryu gets his leg bar on and Onita is reaching for the ropes, but then he realizes the ropes are barbed wire and bombs and stops reaching for the ropes.
Yes, we've got a lot of submission moves in this match, which is less fun to watch, but it is certainly interesting within the context of this match type because you can't escape.
Yeah, I think Tenryu's like trying to like almost pacify Onita in the match by like not giving into the gimmicks and stuff like that.
Well, also I think it's more realistic that way because if you were genuinely in that situation, you'd be avoiding those ropes like everything. Like, and you would, a submission makes perfect sense because they can't escape by touching the ropes.
And I liked as well that Tenryu in the match, he isn't doing a lot of what he does normally, which is, hitting the ropes. It's still early enough in his career, 94, even though here I will say he looks like a grizzled owl vet. And it's funny because there's like a period from like here until like literally like the 2000s where he has this kind of like just block of being an old man, kind of this impervious big chunk of beef. Absolutely a fat. If you like an old grizzled vet, a 10-year-old vet, this is the match for you. He hits him with a powerbomb and it's like it's in slow motion. It is absolutely sick. Tenryu, the only thing that can cause him to go into the bombs is he decides to try and go for a lariat on Onita and he can't stop his own momentum, and seeing him going from being so stoked to be like, oh no, and then boom, a big flash of smoke and he comes tumbling down, and Onita decides to hit a powerbomb of his own, and it's somehow even scarier than Tenryu's. Tenryu kind of becomes less and less mobile as the career kind of goes on. He becomes like more like one solid piece, I think, Another kaboom, another powerbomb, and Onita is definitely in harm's way at the moment. Tenryu shifts later on in the match into, fuck it, I'm just going to start throwing you into the bombs. No more about this purity of wrestling business. He is nasty, he's cruel, but the audience still seem to love him because he is so cool at the same point as being all these other things. I think at this point Onita had taken 5 power bombs, showing we've come a long way since the King's Road style, baby. FMW likes the finishes. And it turns out powerbomb number 6 was the ticket, and Tenryu picks up the win. Immediately, all the young boys and ringside attendants come in, start dousing Onita with water. He is covered in blood. You don't know what's more dangerous. Was it Tenryu or the bombs? It was a really interesting clash of styles, and I was just kind of amazed because we watched this match after seeing lots of Tenryu doing, stuff with WWF guys and Westerners, and be able to fit into like a Macho King match and be able to fit into an Onita match seamlessly. It's a very different style from all the stuff we saw with Jumbo Tsuruta as well in the 80s in All Japan. So it feels like the guy can kind of be slotted in anywhere at this point. I think I like this match a lot more than you somehow.
Yeah, this was an interesting match. Just to see kind of how someone like Tenryu with his background would adapt to this match type.
Yeah.
But it's quite slow, and it's not, if you hear exploding barbed wire match, you don't think of a match like this.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I gave it 3 out of 5.
Hey, how about that? So the crossover with WWF and War ended at the end of 1994, And War at this point kind of faded a little bit into the background. He ceded control of the company to his brother-in-law, and he let him kind of control things more as he himself, Tenryu, started doing more dates here and there for New Japan Pro Wrestling. And War did kind of wind up formally around 1976, and they did a couple of reunion shows here or there, but it was kind of like almost more of a concept they could go back to. His daughter actually ended up doing a lot of the promoting, and his wife as well, in something called the Tenryu Project, which would be kind of like a successor to War that would start in the 2010s. Again, with the same ethos of trying to train up younger wrestlers, give people exposure, bring people in from other companies, and do collaborations and crossovers. So I think even though War was ultimately, you could argue it was a failure in terms of a business, but in terms of an impact and what it helped achieve in wrestling and how it changed it for the better, it's got to be one of the more successful ones. And certainly, you're going to follow a blueprint for being a good boss in wrestling. It feels like Tenryu's kind of top of the list there. Mm-hmm. Very rarely we talk about good promoters.
No.
Usually the ones that are considered good promoters are the ones who fuck over their wrestlers the most to make the most money that way. So we flash forward to the year 2000, and All Japan has hit upon extremely hard times. Giant Baba had passed away at this point, and his widow, who had, similar to Tenryu's wife, who was instrumental in his success, Baba's wife had done a lot of the booking, a lot of the promoting, a lot of the business that went besides Baba's kind of promoting and whatnot. And there was an exodus from the All Japan ranks. Almost the entire roster, bar like 3 or 4 people, left at this point.
Wow.
There was a disagreement between the booker and Baba's widow, and kind of people felt like, well, that's it. All Japan had been kind of dwindling for years. It felt like naturally it was going to be over, until they decided to make a call for one last run. Who could come in, this spry young chicken in his 50s, to have one last run? Tenryu, the prodigal son, returns to All Japan Pro Wrestling because Baba's not alive anymore, which means he's allowed to come back.
Over his dead body, exactly.
He takes one big step and walks into there. There is a famous clip of him being like just announced and brought back in. It is just an old man coming into a smallish building, but the reaction, the emotion, what it means, it's very, very pivotal, I think, for the last hurrah of All Japan. And in many respects, Tenryu's last hurrah as well. So the idea of his return is that he's going to help kind of bring in a few of the people from War to fill out the ranks, try and steady the ship, and maybe have one last hurrah for All Japan Pro Wrestling. Which takes us to our last match we're going to talk about here today, which is Tenryu taking on Kawada in All Japan Pro Wrestling from October in the year 2000. And this is for the Triple Crown Championship, the very belt that he beat Jumbo Tsuruta for many moons ago. Or 3 belts, I should say. I like the Triple Crown. I like 3 belts.
It's cool.
Feels very important. So what we have here, Joe, is the master, the old veteran, the old ace of All Japan, taking on the student, the man who's the future of the company, the current, the now. And they're battling for the future of the very company that both are helping to create. And it's a fabulous story of 2 men underestimating one another for different reasons. And I think it's one of the rare cases as well when I see a guy strutting out to the ring in his mid-50s and I go, oh yeah, peak version of that guy. Is there any other person you can think of where you're like, I want him a bit old, the old, what's that?
Rick,
yeah,
Ric
that's
Flair,
true.
Yeah.
Joe wants middle-aged, mid-divorce Ric Flair. Peak Ric Flair,
But which divorce? I could be any number of ages.
How many? 4 perhaps? Yeah. I love at the start that you can tell that the fans are absolutely in awe of both men stood across from each other. Like the idea of Tenryu being back in All Japan is still mind-blowing to these people. So they milk the anticipation. It's something I don't think we would have gotten back in the earlier ones that we were watching in the 80s.
No, exactly. It's I mean, you could certainly call it milking it. My perspective was there was a lot of standing around looking at each other.
There's kind of a stare-off at the start, and both men realize after a few exchanges that they're not fighting the image of the man that they had in their head. Tenryu, I think, in his mind, reckons that Kawada is this like young punk who's not on his level. Kawada probably thinks that Tenryu's this old bastard whose best days are long since behind him. Turns out both of them are wrong. And something that Tenryu has added into his repertoire, that is horrible, and I think might make you end up sounding like Tenryu if it happened to you, is the dreaded throat chop.
Yeah.
Now, the man throws heavy hands, and I think we've talked about his chops that much, but they are hands of stone.
Yeah.
The alternating of the big chop and then the big punch as well. Oftentimes, it feels like Vader, where I think he's just punching people in the jaw, or punches them in the face or whatnot. There's a lot.
Maybe.
In this one. Once they start trading the strikes, that majestic facial expression action starts coming out. Kawada starts doing these like little kicks as well. I know that you're often very much, you hate when people do the thing where they grab the head and they go the little
Yeah. No, he does this well.
Yes, a little bit more dangerous than your typical, I think.
Yeah, definitely less safe, yeah.
So after coming out of a long figure four leg lock, Tenryu full on punches Kawada in the face, and it's like, this is one of my favorite sells of all time, because he just went BAM and he punched him. And usually if someone punches you, you just kind of, you fall over, you grab your face or whatever. Kawada like puts his hands on his legs and takes a deep breath and kind of like hunkers down as he kind of like comes to terms with the fact that he has just been punched full force in the face. I think most people who wrestle against Terry Funk have that feeling at least once per match. I like there's like lots of weird momentum shifts in here. Like a strong strike is just as likely to knock you on your ass as it is to make you stand up all pissed off and incredulous at the other guy.
Tenryu does an excellent deathlock in this match. He takes it really nice and deep. His squat looks really strong. The guy has very strong muscular thighs, you can see.
Yeah, Tenryu, even in his older age, like, it's interesting, his body does change in some respects. Like, he becomes a kind of, I don't know, looser up top or whatever, but he still is, like, made out of strong, sturdy material. He's got good bones, good foundations, you know? It's a house that would last 1,000,000 years if it was made out of Tenryu. There's a twisting dragon sleeper at one point. That's when he hooks his arm around the back of his neck and pulls the other arm back.
Oh, that looks really nice.
Yes, at this point that Joe turned to me and went, "You could do that to me?"
Yeah.
And I wrote down here, I would likely go to prison for murder if I tried that. Well, it's true. Look, twist your head. I think your head would come off like a Lego man's if I did that.
That's what I want. It looks nice.
Put it up on a shelf.
Relaxing.
Kawada does this absolutely beautiful enzigiri, almost to mock Tenryu's much maligned enzigiri.
Right, yeah, because Tenryu does an absolute dog shit enzigiri here.
That's how you can tell how old he is. Like, the rings on a tree, like, you're not going to tell from the strikes or from the power bomb.
It's the enzigiri.
It's the telltale sign.
And it was basically, you wouldn't even know it was his enzigiri if you hadn't watched, like, you know, his matches kind of running up to this, so you know where it comes from and how he starts it. But it just looks like he rolls into Kawada. It looks so bad, but I kind of love it.
I think there is probably, like, a lot of fans who I think this is, like, kind of, you know, because you start, like, if you're a fan of my age and you watch Japanese wrestling and you started watching, when I started watching Western wrestling, this is the Tenryu that you start with. So I could see how a lot of people might just view him as being this, like, old dude who was old. Like, I can't think of any guys who were old when I started watching wrestling who were still wrestling 15 years later,
Terry
you know?
Funk.
I guess, yeah, that would be it. But Terry at least wasn't on a kind of the main stage of companies, at least, you know? So we have something that I just was waiting for in so many matches, because Tenryu is, even when he's selling or even when he's in pain or anguish, he rarely goes over the top. And no more than the Randy episode, I think one of my favourite things in the world is when a guy who's got this ice cold demeanour loses his shit. It's always compelling. So when Tenryu starts screaming in this match, I was extremely on the edge of my seat. And just as soon as that happens, one of the most horrible things, we watched so many matches, all of them were very physical. This was the worst spot in all of them.
So Kawada, he throws Tenryu against the ropes and then does a running big boot, I think it was. And it looks so good. It looks sick as shit. And Tenryu spills to the outside and the camera angle is kind of slightly below his face.
He goes over the rail and everything.
Yeah. And we just see, like, blood splurting out of his nose.
It's like, broken. It has to be, like. It's the only way.
You can't fake that.
I think this was the point where I was like, you shouldn't be. I mean, I don't think that was the intent, was it?
I doubt it.
But I think when you're into breaking each other's noses, this is where I was like, I don't know if this is it, guys. This is like, I'm feeling like a sick freak for it.
Yeah.
Like, and this is the point where even if I was enjoying the match as much, I felt bad for liking it, like there was something wrong with me. And just like that, though, in the match, Tenru becomes this underdog who is still determined to kill his younger, more, put together, longer gas tank opponent. He punches him right in the face, hits a dirty brainbuster.
That looked so terrifying.
Yeah, I think that was that a receipt for the big boot to the face.
Maybe.
You break my nose, I break your head. Tenru picks up the win, and like in the aftermath, Kawada is just sat up, wide-eyed, and it really freaked me out. I think like at this point, I was thinking the upper limit of some things we were worried about in the earlier matches, but we kind of like, it's so long ago. But 2000 felt, even though it's 25 years ago, it felt just recent enough that I had a slight icky feeling at this point, And I think, is it safe to say that maybe they crossed the threshold for you from enjoyable to grotesque? I don't know.
No, not that. I actually really liked the gross bits. They were kind of my favourite parts of the match. This match just was not for me. It felt like they were kind of waiting to take it in turns to do their moves. It felt like it was a match in kind of stages where there was the punching stage and there was the kicking stage. It felt quite formulaic, I guess, but that doesn't seem quite fair as well because it's also not formulaic. And I know this is a match style as well that a lot of people really, really enjoy. I think for me it was just like the combination of the style of match and then how long it was. It's quite a long match.
I thought that if it was the intent of this to capture the glory days of All Japan of old, I don't think it did that. I think at best I would say it was more like if you wanted to have a last hurrah and see a 50-year-old guy, he wins the Triple Crown again. And it's like it's more of a last hurrah for this era of Tenru in All Japan than it was for All Japan itself.
Yeah.
Because it didn't feel like it was respecting that style that we were gushing about from the 80s and whatnot.
No, there were some really, really cool moves though, really cool spots in this match. But yeah, we watched another match from this year, the year 2000, where he fought against Stan Henson.
Oh yeah.
And that was fantastic. I loved that match. But this one just wasn't for me. I feel really bad for rating it this way, but I gave it 2 stars.
Well, the thing is that, because the age progressed or whatnot, I think that it didn't achieve its goals maybe in maybe what you were expecting for it to be, like as a kind of him coming back to All Japan or whatever it was. I mean, I really enjoyed the match, but I felt more of a freak for enjoying the match than I thought that I would say you have to go out of your way to see this match or this exact kind of era of him.
Yeah.
But that being said, there's a lot of fun things to see him as an older wrestler. We caught a match of like 04, 05, him versus Kenta, and it was just like him as that like stalwart older veteran. He was there to test the younger guys. That I felt was a better role for him than here. It felt like there was an element of trying to capture the glory days.
Yeah.
Here it felt a bit more like that kind of WWE style of capturing.
Okay. I'm glad you said it. Yeah.
Yeah, because case in point, this didn't reinvigorate All Japan.
No.
All Japan kind of, continued to peter on at this point. Maybe it saved it from dying off altogether. Probably, yeah. But it felt, not the magical moments that it necessarily could have been. I still really enjoyed it. I think that with regards to Tenru, the fact that he still had around a dozen or so years after this point, that was somewhat alarming to me, because he did seem physically diminished at this point. Like, he couldn't do a lot of the things that he used to be able to do in many respects.
Yeah, and he couldn't do the enziguri, but I think he still could do the things that were kind of really important to his style, like the chops and stuff.
And I think at this point in time, like, that was kind of almost as important, the striking battles.
Yeah.
It felt more strong style than King's Road style, I guess, is the point I was trying to make. But, like, at this point as well, he's not just a legendary figure in wrestling, but his place in the greater media of Japan and the culture of Japan, like, he's almost as big a star as he is, in wrestling, outside of wrestling at this point.
Yeah.
So the last kind of decade or so of Tenryu's career was marked by him doing, some really unexpected things, some of which I was really desperate for us to see, but just couldn't get our hands on easily at all. And that was his tenure in Hustle. Now,
oh, yeah.
do you remember what episode that came up in?
Was it the Tajiri episode?
It was, yeah. That was one of the companies that he was kind of part of, and it was kind of, in the mid-2000s, there had almost been a big decline in Japan because of the over-reliance, it felt like, of, doing the strong style, doing the shoot fighting mimicry, because, K1, kickboxing, MMA had taken off so big in Japan, it kind of felt like, besides the point, why would you have an imitation of that? So the idea of Hustle was to be like the complete opposite of that, which is total sports entertainment, cartoon, crazy fucking shit. And we did see little glimpses of it here and there. Tenryu was used as like a frequent comedic figure in it, playing everything from a giant version of Hayabusa to, just being kind of like a parody of himself in some ways. And it's kind of sad because like the little bits I could find from people talking about Hustle and Tenryu in Hustle, it's all so negative. Because it's like, the Dark Ages. Like Hustle is like referred to on so many sources as being like a critically maligned group, even though I think it's like some of our favorite type of shit, the real comedy stuff. But in my mind, at least, it made me happy that a lot of his later years, as he was doing more media appearances and doing more kind of comedy stuff, that at least in the ring, he wasn't trying to be the Tenryu of the golden era. He was being like kind of more of a comedy figure, having, a bit more fun with it and getting to work with younger people. So I think that was really nice. But if you have got any links to Hustle stuff that you can, let us know. We'll share them out,
Please.
or point us in the right direction. We'd love to watch more of it. We did make the decision to watch his retirement match.
Yes.
And the retirement match, I had two viewpoints going into it. Some people had told me that the retirement match was an absolute disgrace. And other people told us that the retirement match was an incredibly emotional moment and, very kind of, full circle and all that, and end of a big story. We've watched it this morning. We didn't, kind of review it, so to speak, but what were your kind of thoughts on him? Because he faced Okada, and the idea of, like peak Okada, 2015, I think it was thereabouts. It's an odd mix to have him in there with someone who is considered to be the best in the business at that point.
It's not a great match. Okada is fantastic. Obviously, he works very hard to try and protect Tenryu. But unfortunately, I mean, you can just see it even from Tenryu's entrance. He's kind of limping. He's very unsteady on his feet.
Near the ropes for a lot of it.
Yeah. But I think in the grand scheme of retirement matches, this is actually very good. But when you compare it to his own career, it's obviously not. It can never be on par with his heyday.
I was amazed at how much he was able to do, because the main thing that I think people expect him to do, and he could still do, was throw a chop.
Yeah, he can still throw a chop, but he can still do a powerbomb.
Yeah.
Kind of.
He dropped Okada right in his head.
Right on his head. But to be fair, we saw a lot of that in the peak of his career as well.
It's so funny because when the match started, the realization that, I remember hearing when the Rock and Roll Express, they were kind of doing a couple of last matches, and there's a big queue of wrestlers who are please let me, FTR, please let us do a match with you, even though you're fucking 70 years old. And they would bump their asses off, they'd flip over. Ricky Steamboat had a similar thing as well, where people are please, we'll oversell, we'll run into you, we'll do everything we can. But realizing in this match that Okada, because he's the IWGP champ at this point, he can't just be hey, I'll, you hit me light, I'll pretend it's really hard. Because of the legitimacy that's kind of expected from being that guy in New Japan, he can't really do that. So he's in the situation where it's I'm going to have to hit you hard and you're going to have to hit me hard, even though both things are kind of a struggle. The crowd, though, you couldn't tell them it wasn't the most important match in the world. Yeah. They are on tender hook. They are so into it. They keep cutting to the audience. People have tears in their eyes and whatnot. The match does kind of end, after a long battle, as much as between Tenryu and himself as is between Tenryu and Okada. And he does beat him clean with the Rainmaker and bows to him in the end. And I was thinking I don't know if I'd have done that as my last match. I don't know how I feel about this. And then they brought out Terry Funk and Stan Henson. Yeah. And the sum total of the dozens of hours of matches of his that we'd seen in the story and the journey we'd be on, I had tears coming out of me at this point. Now, this is a man who routinely cries at Rocky, so take that for what it's worth. And I also cried at the end of Sex and the City Season 4 when Mr. Big moves to Napa Valley. Yeah. So maybe don't take that as word for it. But for me, it was, I don't know, seeing these three owl men with big bouquets of flowers, really heartwarming.
That's it. You said earlier about, people say it's a disaster, but they also say it's emotionally very fulfilling. And I think both are true. It's not a good match, but it is very healing, I think, to see a wrestler have a retirement moment like that where they just kind of get their flowers. Everyone takes a good long 10 minutes to give them an ovation and bring out some of their compatriots from their feuds back in the day. It's a really touching moment, and I kind of wish there were more moments like that in wrestling.
Because we're on the cusp of Goldberg having his retirement match, and I feel like a lot of that is going to be trying to, I mean, for one, this match that he promoted himself, it was from the Tenryu Project, his daughter, helped promote it or whatnot. So it was kind of like it wasn't taking up space on someone else's show. It was its own thing. Whereas with the Goldberg retirement, I'm kind of worried that they're wanting you to feel like it's going to be exactly like it was, 10 years ago, when even then it felt like a stretch.
No, and it never can be.
No.
But yeah, it's very sweet. It's a very sweet moment. And it's also very sad because I believe Riki Shoshu died before this, and obviously Jumbo Tsuruta did.
Yeah, a lot of his compatriots were kind of not there anymore.
Past, yeah.
But Terry, who helped train him, and Stan, who was such a big part of his career, like it was
such
beautiful.
A close friend of
his.
Yeah,
and just seeing as well that at the end, like all the people, all the trainees, all the folks who he's helped mentor and all that, like such a huge group of people in the ring. A few people you even recognize. It was like
Meiko Satomura, she was in the ring, like for the photo opportunity at the end where they all kind of said thank you and stuff and gave him his flowers.
And that Tenryu Project promotion, it still runs shows here and there. They do kind of still have that ethos of what war was once about. The only thing I can hope is that it's like the first ever war show, which allegedly began with Tenryu playing bingo with the audience for an hour inexplicably.
What?
Yeah, and then he did like a Q&A, and there's like, right now the wrestling starts.
Amazing.
Like, I don't think you've got the voice to be a bingo caller, Tenryu. I could be wrong. I don't know. But at this point as well, it's like, for him to have a finish to his career, I think he had earned that on his own terms, how he wants to do it. And also a finish that I think ensured that he would never want to come back and do another. This wasn't a Ric Flair's last match level of eyes bigger than your stomach. He did get through it. And I think at the end of it, it wasn't like Rick where he's like, the first thing you can tell at Rick at the end of his match is like, I have to do another. No, that can't be it. I want to do another.
I think another important difference, which again I think is more to do with the culture of maybe Japan and the culture of wrestling in Japan compared to the West, is I think so many like Western wrestlers, part of the reason they want to have their final retirement match is because they want their ego to be fed.
Yeah, they want to feel like they did however long ago.
And they want to feel, they want to be back in the news again, and they want the money, Whereas Tenryu, very savvy businessman. Like, he may have been handing out money all the time, but the reason he could afford to do that was because he was so smart with how he invested.
He had a chain of sushi restaurants, apparently.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And he would serve the sushi himself.
Like Rocky.
So cool.
Tell me about when you fought Terry Gordy in the Tokyo Dome.
But also, a fundamental difference, I think, is the attitudes towards wrestling in the West compared to... I guess I should be more specific with America compared to Japan.
Yeah.
Because in America, as a wrestler, when you retire, that's it. Your career is done.
You're the ex-wrestler,
Yeah, and you just won't be in the news anymore. You won't be in any conversations. No one's going to be talking about you because wrestling is not mainstream, it's niche.
Hang on a second. They're talking about me down the Toy Fair in Tupelo this weekend. Now, hang on a second. They're talking about me a lot.
Like, that's the most fame you can get. Like, best case scenario is you either get a Legends contract, that's the big money, but you don't really get many media opportunities, or you get to do the conventions and stuff like that. Whereas
they're separate worlds almost, the wrestling world and the rest of media in America, yeah.
Whereas Tenryu, and part of this is due to the fact that, he's such a big star in Japan, you're from sumo, from wrestling, from things being written about him in the newspapers, like scandals and what have you. And I say that as in not like he's done something horrible that we've not talked about, but just in terms of like him leaving these companies.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And that being
he's a newsworthy individual,
yeah. And because in Japan, wrestling is less niche than it is in America, when he finally retired, it's not like he had no career anymore. He had a brand new career. Yeah. He managed to, he was already a household name in Japan, and he continued to cash in on that forever. Like, you can't imagine, like, Ric Flair, the best he can hope for, or Hulk Hogan, is like, they might get like a weird ad sponsorship deal, and that's how you might see them.
Well, yeah, I remember, for instance, Mick Foley, he wrote in his book about the struggles of trying, he thought, hey, I'm leaving wrestling, and also I have the benefit of, I'm a New York Times best-selling author.
You become a household name to a nobody.
But yeah, he struggled a lot and trying. He tried to do things like voice acting and even acting and media appearances, and it was just kind of. And he had link ups with everyone from Jon Stewart to he was on Avatar: The Last Airbender, and even still he couldn't kind of get it all going. But whereas I feel like in Japan, it's like you're more set up. It's not an atypical thing to be part of that because Masahiro Chono is someone who's as known outside of wrestling as he is in wrestling for his wrestling persona, I guess.
We talk a bit about it in the Vader episode, but like the idea that in the West, wrestling is kind of like looked down upon by a lot of people, and it's just like this other industry, and it's very hard to penetrate. Whereas in Japan, it's slightly less so, and it's a bit more kind of, more households kind of will watch it as families and what have you. And, you see that even in regards to like the stuff we've talked about with the music in this episode. They have big name musicians from famous bands doing entrance music, and, they had like Go Nagai designing
so much crossover
Vader's
and all the
helmet and stuff like that. Like, it's not considered like, why are you doing wrestling stuff? Like, it's not looked down upon. So when he stopped being a wrestler, he just naturally transitioned into doing comedy stuff, voice acting. Like, he just would appear in random places.
Some of the anime clips that show his Joan Man, it's like, look at this, it's this random cutesy character, be like,
yeah.
And, oh, it's Tenry.
And that's it. He has managed to make a post-wrestling career of himself. Like, this is like Ric Flair's Hulk Hogan's dream come true. He just plays himself in everything. But it's like a cartoon version of himself where he's become like, it's not like a household name, but he will show up in so many places. Like, he was on Gaki no Tsukai, which is a very big comedy skit. Kind of, it's hard to explain, but it's kind of comedy.
Live comedy, kind of improv sketch.
Where they hit everyone with bats if they laugh. And he was on there. He goes on most years to basically play himself, where
he has a kind of gimmick of the mispronunciation, mumbling type thing.
He plays a parody of himself, because obviously we know he is a very mumbly man.
Yeah.
And so he just does that dialed up to try and make these guys laugh on Gaki no Tsukai. But he's also shown up in, as you mentioned, in Magical Girl Kirumi, which is an anime. He's actually shown up in a bunch of animes.
Yeah.
I believe he's shown up in some music videos.
He's in a J-pop video or two, I think. Yeah.
The Yakuza series.
Yeah.
Again, basically playing himself, which is, fantastic.
Oh no, he was himself. Yeah.
And again, it's just like, you feel bad for the wrestlers in the West, because they just, unless they're really savvy, they just will never manage to achieve that the way that someone like him has just. And I don't want to just be like, it's just because of Japanese culture, because obviously he's savvy at marketing himself.
He's kind of got a slightly different position in the culture than your typical big name wrestler.
But also, I think it's important to recognize that he realized the opportunity he has, and he hasn't pissed that away. So many wrestlers in the West, because they don't have that post-career opportunity, they kind of grind themselves into a pulp, and everyone gets sick of them. And we're all just like, oh God, they're putting all these matches and they're doing these fucking podcasts, and I don't want to hear their hot takes.
Well, because
Henry's kind of done the opposite of that, where it's just like, oh, you find my voice funny? Okay, I'll just do that in lots of things.
Because it feels like right now, like, because WWE, and I think wrestling has never been more, in the last 20 years, wrestling has never been more popular in America than it is right now. But in terms of like kind of the after the fact, you can point to the fact that, say, MJF, Becky Lynch, Liv Morgan all got movie roles this year. Seth Rollins got a movie role that got cut. But like, I always wonder, is that setting them up for after the fact, or is that just because they're stars now and they want them now? Like, it's a lot of stuff that this crossover happens in the midst of the career. But I don't think we've yet seen the popularity of wrestling in America right now translate into someone's post-career getting a big buff. Even Stone Cold Steve Austin, the biggest name in American wrestling, like, since Hulk Hogan, he fucking struggled. Hulk Hogan's just, doing all sorts of weird political shit, and like, you fucking start up a freestyle wrestling company? Is that really what you want to do? And it's either that, or like you have to be like a Maven or Stevie Richards and do like a, really hustle and grind and make a kick-ass YouTube channel or whatever it is. And it feels like it's not set up for the post-career like it is in Japan.
No,
maybe.
It's absolutely not, because so many people do look down on wrestling. And I think, the examples...
Even with the popularity,
still. And I think, there's so few examples of wrestlers making it after kind of officially leaving wrestling. Like, I think you've got The Rock, he's the best example. Batista. And I think John Cena is doing a good job so far, but it's not really fair to compare him because he's not fully retired yet. There is still time to piss that goodwill away.
With this run, no.
But yeah, I think it's different, and it's an uphill battle, because again, even in those situations, they are trying to move into an entirely different industry where they will be competing with other people who have trained their whole fucking life to be actors. Like, you are competing against very skilled, very hardworking, very ambitious people. Whereas Tenryu, he's built this niche for himself. Only he can do the jobs that he is doing.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference. And you're not going to see that with The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin or Hulk Hogan, because their egos are too large, I think, as
I
part
don't
of
think
it.
it's just in the way that the media is consumed or
Yeah.
whatever it is as well. But like, I was on the Tenryu Project website, and he had a couple of health problems in the last few years, but like just seeing like 1,000 people show up because the Tenryu Project are like, it's the 1 year anniversary of him coming out of hospital because he had that health scare. Like 1,000 fans meet up, and it's like, wow, and shit like that is like, I don't know. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or not, but it does really feel like it's a rarity in this day and age where someone, we're talking about a guy we started in the 70s, man, and
Yeah.
we're all the way here now in 2025, and that love is still there,
Yeah, but I think part of that, again, if you're going to compare them to the names I mentioned, they are so ego-driven, they don't want to give back. And Tenryu is not like that.
That was his whole career.
That's
felt
his whole
like,
career, and I think that's again part of why he's been rewarded with this fantastic post-wrestling career is that he's a guy who we've heard again and again is like, he always helps lift up other people, he always wants to connect others, he gives them money, opportunities, he'll lose to you, he doesn't mind. There's none of that ego, none of that, I need to get myself over. So I think people are much more hospitable to working with him because they want to give back just the way he's given to them.
I think ultimately that comes down to, I think he has never seemingly been a man who's shook by self-doubt and whatnot, where a lot of the ego-driven wrestlers that you might compare,
they're very insecure.
It's insecurity, and it's what it is. And I
Yeah.
think when you've taken as many risks as he has done, both physically in the ring and also like, business-wise, reputational speaking-wise, there's not many people who can turn their back on Giant Baba and take the big money payday and has still somehow managed to pivot that into a way where he was more renowned and more revered for being like, an equitable, fair person in wrestling.
But that's it, I think, because in so many other instances, given that opportunity, okay, imagine if Hulk Hogan had been given that opportunity, what would he do with it? Do you think he'd start a small wrestling company and pay them loads more money than they would be in other promotions?
Probably
Do you think he'd be
not.
giving them pocket money and buying them steak dinners?
Unless that company hired the Nasty Boys, Brother Brudeye, maybe Jimmy Hart could come in there,
that's
Eric
it.
Bischoff, some of the guys. Yeah, instead he would do like he did in TNA, which is try and eat the company out from the inside while not promoting it or anything like that.
And
So,
as well, I think they're money driven a lot more than Tenryu is, because although he gets paid for a lot of these appearances, and I'm sure he got paid very well for the Yakuza games and probably for some of the Gaki no Tsukai stuff. But like that Magical Girl Kurumi anime I showed you, I don't think the budget was big. The animation style was
it looked
really
like a Flash
crap.
animation. Yeah.
But I think it's besides the point for him. He doesn't need the money. He likes to keep giving back, and I think that's why he's going to keep getting these opportunities.
So at the end of the story here, folks, what we can tell you is we've got a man who deserves to definitely be remembered, or at least acknowledged in the here and now, not just for the incredible style of matches. I mean, I think I heard in like the last 3 years, I heard the phrase King's Road so much, like they directly referenced on AEW television, like Eddie Kingston made it his business, to like let everyone know about the style of wrestling. And for that, I thank you very much, Mr. Kingston, because I think it has helped put us on this path. But I feel like, he is so important. He is someone who could easily be overlooked. If you are interested in the history of wrestling, the development of the style, and also just kind of, perhaps a slightly different way to do business. Because the deeper you look into wrestling sometimes, and particularly the politics of promoting and booking and all that, you can get very fucking cynical. And take it from me, like, it can be pretty heartbreaking the way that some wrestlers or some promoters treat the talent and whatnot.
And
so
can you imagine as well, with what he's been through, so many big names in wrestling from America would have such a shitty attitude towards it, because, and it would be fair enough, because like he's been kind of fucked over in many respects, like, blacklisted from one company or one industry to another company in a different industry, and that would make many people very bitter.
Yeah, they go start one hell of a dark podcast to like that in this day and age.
And instead he's taken that feeling and he's just like channeled it into giving back as much as he possibly can and improving things so that what happened to him won't happen to others.
All while doing it with a grimace on his face. And for that, Mr. Tenryu, I can only say, one hell of a wrestler. And like, in terms of the giving and all that, came in here after maybe a week or two of watching the stuff, I was like, Tenryu's my favorite wrestler.
Yep, same.
And now I'm here at the end, and I've, probably actually from talking through this, I've got actually, I know I mentioned Jumbo and I mentioned Ricky Shoshu, but goddamn, I never think I'd say I love Giant Baba now. Like, he was just kind of like a silly name that I kept rating all the time. Be like, what's his deal? And I kind of feel through Tenryu, I've learned a lot about him.
Fascinating guy.
Hey, if anything we've talked about today sounds interesting to you, head over to howtowrestling.com, click on some of those links, head on to YouTube, head on wherever you might want to look for some videos. There's a load of people who are very passionate, dedicated historians of that particular genre and era of wrestling on Twitter and whatnot. Check it out. You will often find yourself overwhelmed in 2025 with the amount of wrestling that's on offer, and there's so much different types of wrestling. But very often the antidote to that overwhelming feeling is take a little trip back to the past.
Yeah.
And we have been greatly, richly rewarded, it feels like, as fans for having taken the plunge and looked backwards to another country, another type of wrestler, another type of wrestling. And I'm a big fan, what can I say?
Yeah, same.
Let's check out some of the tweets and some of the messages for How to Tenryu.
First up from Stephen Campbell. I know of Tenryu, but it was playing the TEW booking simulation game that really started my love of him. In a 1992 ECW save, he always got high ratings, and that led me down the rabbit hole of checking his matches, which lived up to the hype.
Yeah, he's like someone who's got quite a number of 5-star matches under his name, but also like he won like Wrestler of the Year, like with big kind of gaps between it from when he was younger, from when he's older. The only question I have about your simulation there is what era of Tenryu is it? Because it's like so many different kind of iterations of the man. But like a lot of people as well, like, may not know, he was instrumental in making like some of the kind of Super Nintendo era wrestling games. He was with War, he was instrumental in like helping develop some of those. Truly the Kenny Omega of his time.
Yeah. Next up from Olivier Cadot. Looking at his career really makes you realise that Japan had around 5 ECW level promotions minimum in the 90s, brackets War, FMW, SWS, UWF, and the pre-Dragon Gate version of itself. And they were all founded by wrestlers. It would be like if Taz founded ECW.
I don't know, I kind of feel like, is it naive of me? It may well be, but like, I think people say the last person who should be running a wrestling company is a wrestler, because I think,
I bet promoters are the ones to say that.
I feel like, there's a lot to be said for the wrestling promotion. I don't know if that necessarily means that wrestling promotion could be like the top company in any given country, but certainly there can be a lot can be given back to the wrestling community that way, I believe.
Yeah, definitely. Next from Saint Chadis. Tenryu versus Jumbo is one of my favourite series of matches ever, but my absolute favourite moment in Tenryu returning to All Japan post-Noah Exodus. All Japan had absolutely no one other than Kawada and Fuchi, and without Tenryu returning, the company would have died. So for that alone, he's the man.
Yeah, and you know what? Complex feelings you may have had in that match aside, like, the man literally stuck his finger in the dam there. He really like helped hold back imminent destruction.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I would have goodwill for any wrestler who decided to give back to a company that would be dying otherwise. Like, because competition is so important.
And look, All Japan is still around.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have been
wouldn't
otherwise.
have been, yeah.
No wrestling company can survive with 3 people, even though some of the Irish promotions I watched way back in the day tried to do just that.
Next up from Stephen Conway. It might be a controversial take, but I think Tenryu has the best powerbomb of all time.
I mean, look, I'll tell you this.
That is a spicy take.
It's a spicy take, Joe.
I do love it, though.
They both go down on the ground. Someone's grabbing by the waistlock. Double pin. 1-2. Gets up, turns around. Yeah! Picks him up. Bam! Big dirty powerbomb. He hits that powerbomb on Hogan. He hits that powerbomb on Giant Baba.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that powerbomb is it's scary, but that's kind of why I love it.
His opponent on their heads about 50% of the time, and it looks really cool.
And in that Okada match, when he does drop poor old Kazuchika right there on his head, there's like a split second where he's like, is he alright? I better pin him.
Next up from Monkey Buckles. No episode on Tenryu is complete without reference to his 2005 Noah G1 run, where he was maybe the best grumpy old man wrestler that wrestling has ever had. Just peak old man being an entertaining, mean bastard.
Oh, baby, yeah. I think some of that 2005 Noah stuff that we saw was really, like, I think in terms of being as old as you can be before the oldness starts to really impact your abilities in the ring. I think that might be the sweet spot right there. But yeah, I'd love, sometime for pay-per-view Classic or whatever.
No.
I mean, a Noah show would be great, or even just like to do a whole G1 tournament.
Wow, yeah.
I've never watched a G1 tournament, It might be a fun one to do. People swear by them, Joe. Our next episode, one that we have been wanting to do for a long time, and one that is probably going to be, a bit hard in some respects, but certainly one that a lot of people, I'm sure, are very excited to hear all about. It's going to be about Bray Wyatt, probably one of the wrestlers that I think I credit with getting you into this sport long before we decided to do a podcast about it.
Absolutely, yeah. One of my first favourite wrestlers I ever had.
One of the most unique and captivating wrestlers that WWE has ever presented, who very tragically was taken long before his time, and a career that has been filled with mind-blowing highlights, what some consider to be lowlights, yet we always seem to adore. We are very excited to delve into the swamp and head down into the Firefly Funhouse to talk about everything from his days as Husky Harris, his lineage in wrestling, his time in NXT and FCW, the original Wyatt family, of which from our Brody Lee episode, we are massive fans of everything that these men did, and they did it at a time in wrestling when it felt like everything was working against creative, unique, original ideas coming to the forefront. A man who's both a love letter to wrestling's past, but what wrestling could be, and by my rights, should be. Your favourite matches, moments, memories. We'll try and keep it to be as fitting a tribute as possible. How to Bray Wyatt, our next episode, and I can't wait, Joe.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited for this one. I may cry a little bit, a little bit.
Tears in your eyes right now with this one. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Oh no, I did too good an intro. I'm so... Well, folks, don't forget as well, if you like this show and you want to support it, get access to a whole bunch of other content for nearly 10 years now over on patreon.com/HowToWrestling. Joe and I have been reviewing all of the monthly pay-per-views. We do WWE, we do AEW, we do pay-per-view Classic, where we take random shows from wrestling's past, everything from AWA to classic WCW, a recent venture back into the In Your House series with Beware of Dog, and we're always open to new ones, alongside our Total Divas series and a whole hell of a lot of other extra audio goodies for as little as $5 a month. It helps keep this show ad-free, fan and listener supported, and fiercely independent, much like Tenru himself. Oh, there you go. Patreon.com/HowToWrestling. Join for as little as $5 and get access to that entire back catalogue and find out what Joe thought about Battleground 2016. And a big shout out to everyone who helped with this episode. Something a bit different, and a lot of help was needed, and we really appreciate it. So thank you to all of our lovely listeners on social media and on the Patreon page. But until next time, it's a goodbye from me, Kevin.
And a goodbye from me, Joe.
And we'll see you next time on How to Wrestling.
See ya.